Somebody, somewhere, decided you weren't allowed to see any of this. So, for the next few hours, we're doing it anyway. The cartoons they pulled, the kid shows they buried, the books they burned, and the documentaries they made disappear. This is the disturbing banned animations iceberg. Tier 1, Death Note. Ever hated someone? Like, really hated them? The kind of hate where if a magic notebook fell into your lap and all you had to do was write a name and poof, they're gone. Well, that uncomfortable little thought experiment is basically the engine behind the animated series Death Note. In the show, a teenager finds a supernatural notebook that can kill anyone whose name is written inside, and decides to use it responsibly. Criminals only. Predictably, that self-control lasts about 5 minutes. Power does what power always does. By the time the series really gets going, he's lying, manipulating, framing innocent people, and eventually pushing the woman who loves him into sacrificing herself for his plan. The audience eating this up was mostly middle schoolers and teenagers. Kids with very little control over their own lives were suddenly faced with a fantasy about total authority over life and death. Of course it appealed to them. That appeal didn't go unnoticed. In the US and China, students started recreating Death Notes at school. No one actually died, but names did start showing up. And things like this.
A Richmond public school student is suspended over a list of classmates he wrote in a book titled Death Note.
And this.
A suspicious list of names prompts an investigation at a local school and concern from parents. Shelby County school officials say that the list, called Death Note, belonged to an East Middle School student and contained names of other students and staff.
Similar incidents cropped up in China. In Shenyang, students were buying special stationery and copying the rules from the anime, writing names backwards and assigning fake deaths for fun. One student even admitted that when they got tired of studying, they wrote down the names of teachers and celebrities they disliked. As the Death Note craze spread, administrators everywhere started to panic. Not because they thought Death Note would turn kids into killers, but because it encouraged teens to play with judgment and punishment without consequences. It let them rehearse the idea of deciding who deserves to live. That fear had real outcomes. Death Note was banned in parts of China, starting with cities like Shenyang and later expanding to places like Beijing and Shanghai. On June 12, 2015, China's Ministry of Culture officially listed it among 38 anime and manga titles banned for moral and safety concerns. 6 years later, in January 2021, Russia cited similar worries. Authorities argued that the series could negatively influence young viewers, especially teenagers, by romanticizing violence and presenting moral authority as something an individual could simply take for themselves. Critics called the bans excessive. After all, nobody actually died. Supporters argued that the danger was symbolic, that normalizing extreme power fantasies for impressionable minds was the real issue. In the end, the notebook was never the problem. The problem was how easily people, young or old, fall in love with the idea of absolute control. Winnie the Pooh. Imagine being the president of China in the mid-2010s, fresh off a US trip. You did the handshakes, smiled for the cameras, survived the diplomatic circus, and then checked social media. Instead of praise, there it was. Photos of you walking with Barack Obama, side by side, with the Winnie the Pooh strolling with Tigger. Winnie the Pooh is a children's character created in the 1920s by British author A.A. Milne and illustrator E.H. Shepard. He's a soft-spoken bear who lives in the 100-acre wood, worries about honey, and spends his days wandering around his friends Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, Rabbit, and a polite kid named Christopher Robin. For nearly a century, Pooh existed as a harmless comfort media for everyone except the president of China. The whole thing kicked off in 2013 during Xi Jinping's visit to the United States. Someone noticed that a photo of Xi walking beside Barack Obama looked a lot like Pooh ambling along with Tigger. Xi was rounder, Obama was taller and bouncier. And once the internet saw it, that was that. A year later, it happened again during a meeting with Japan's Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. This time, Xi got cast as Pooh and Abe got labeled as Eeyore, which probably did not go over too well. From there, the comparison snowballed. In 2015, during a large military parade, another Pooh-Xi comparison popped up online, and by then, China wasn't really seeing the harmless fun side of it. Feuding with a honey-loving cartoon bear doesn't make a lot of sense, but to be fair, being compared to one doesn't exactly project the image of a strong leader who can flatten your country if pushed. Around 2017, Chinese authorities began quietly censoring Winnie the Pooh online. Images vanished, searches stopped working, and memes were deleted almost as fast as they appeared. In 2018, things escalated further when the website of HBO was blocked shortly after comedian John Oliver spent several minutes on air mocking Xi's apparent sensitivity to the comparisons, while also talking about China's human rights record. That was apparently a 2-for-1 deal no one in Beijing enjoyed. The censorship didn't stop with memes or foreign TV sites. Disney's live-action Christopher Robin never made it into Chinese theaters in 2018. Analysts later said Chinese authorities saw the whole thing as a direct attempt to undermine the dignity of the presidency and Xi himself, which is a remarkable amount of political weight to put on a cartoon bear in a red crop top. South Park. A middle-aged man steps off a plane in China, suitcase in hand, smiling like this is a normal business trip, even though it clearly isn't. He looks relaxed, confident, and wildly unprepared for what's about to happen. Inside his suitcase is weed. A lot of it. Back home, he's a suburban husband with 2 kids and a mortgage. Here, he's about to find out that none of that matters. This is Randy Marsh from South Park, a show that's been on since 1997 and built its reputation on grabbing every taboo, controversial, or ridiculous idea it can find and shoving it directly in your face. South Park follows 4 boys living in a small Colorado town, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, and uses them as an excuse to satirize politics, religion, corporations, and whatever else is unfortunate enough to be happening that week. The show was created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who built their entire career on seeing how far they could push things without landing in jail. In the 2019 episode Banned in China, they pushed directly at Chinese government censorship and Hollywood's willingness to gut creative content to stay profitable in the Chinese market. In that episode, Randy is arrested on the spot after Chinese authorities find weed in his bag and is thrown into prison, where executions, forced labor, and political re-education are treated as routine. At one point, his cellmates include Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, who were locked up simply for being banned characters. Outside the prison, the episode shows movies being rewritten scene by scene to satisfy censors, executives issuing desperate apologies for imaginary offenses, and characters literally erasing parts of their own stories to remain marketable. China's response was immediate. After Banned in China aired, South Park was banned entirely in China. Episodes disappeared from streaming platforms. Clips vanished and searches stopped working. Even indirect references to the show were scrubbed. The series effectively ceased to exist online within the country. But this wasn't even South Park's first offense. An episode showing Buddha snorting cocaine set off Sri Lankan authorities. Any mention of the Prophet Muhammad led to bans, heavy edits, or full removals across parts of the Middle East and the UK. Even in the US, some networks refused to air certain episodes without major cuts, because, by American standards, Parker and Stone had wandered way too far into please don't air this territory. What makes South Park different is that the bands never really slowed it down. The show didn't apologize, didn't pivot, and didn't soften its tone. If anything, the censorship just became fuel. Later episodes openly mocked the bands themselves, and Parker and Stone leaned even harder into doing whatever they wanted. Consequences be damned. More than 2 decades later, South Park is still running, still winning awards, and still getting banned somewhere on Earth every few years. And yes, the animation still looks like it was made in Microsoft Paint, because why fix what works? Family Guy. Have you ever been at a fair and seen a baby in overalls sing about marijuana with a talking dog backup singer? Around you, grown adults are dancing, singing along, and waving bags of weed like this is all completely normal. Well, welcome to the town of Quahog in Family Guy. Family Guy follows the Griffin family, who are unconventional in every possible way. Peter is a reckless blue-collar dad, his wife Lois keeps the household from falling apart, their daughter Meg is pretty much invisible, their son Chris is confused, their other son Stewie is an evil genius in diapers, and Brian is the martini-drinking, cigarette-smoking family dog. That's really all you need to know to understand why this family's misadventures keep getting them into trouble. The marijuana song in Season 7, Episode 12 was all it took for Venezuela to freak out. After that episode aired, the Venezuelan government banned Family Guy entirely, claiming it promoted drug use. And it wasn't just Venezuela that decided they didn't want to deal with the Griffins. Malaysia banned the show because of its constant vulgarity and adult humor. And Russia pushed to ban it after taking offense to the way the show portrayed the country as corrupt and full of illegal substances. Apparently, cartoon jokes can hurt national pride harder than actual sanctions. In the US, Fox refused to air the 2010 episode Partial Terms of Endearment because it tackled abortion. And over the years, multiple episodes were quietly edited or pulled for religion, race, or other sensitive topics. Through all of that, Family Guy just kept going. The show never tried to behave. It just kept going from bad to worse, like Peter after his third beer, leaving everyone else to decide whether to laugh or turn off the TV. Peppa Pig. Imagine you're a 4-year-old pig hosting a very serious tea party, and your little brother shows up holding a spider he pulled out of the bathroom sink. He names it Mr. Skinny Legs and drops it into the dollhouse. You panic, call your dad, and he calmly explains that the spider is harmless, even though his body language strongly disagrees. This scene is from Peppa Pig, a British children's cartoon that began airing in 2004. The show follows Peppa, a 4-year-old pig who's the oldest of siblings, as she jumps in muddy puddles, bickers with her dad, and picks up basic social rules in short, 5-minute episodes meant for toddlers. But when Mr. Skinny Legs aired in Australia, broadcasters ran into a problem. Australian spiders aren't cartoon nuisances. They can be medically dangerous, and kids are taught to stay away. So when Daddy Pig tells Peppa spiders are harmless, he's basically handing out life-threatening advice. Parents worried kids would try to copy what they saw and learned the hard way that Peppa Pig does not live in Sydney. Because of the risk, Australian networks quietly pulled Mr. Skinny Legs, along with another episode called Spiderweb, to avoid encouraging dangerous behavior. That should have been the end of Peppa's troubles. It wasn't. A few years later, Peppa ran into a completely different problem in China. In 2018, the character was briefly scrubbed from Douyin, China's version of TikTok, after users turned her into an ironic symbol of rebellion. A subculture calling themselves Shehuren, or society people, started using Peppa in memes and videos as a way to mock authority and embrace rule-breaking behavior. The government didn't appreciate a children's cartoon becoming shorthand for social defiance, so Peppa quietly disappeared from the platform. The show itself survived, but Peppa's street cred didn't. And that's why Peppa Pig ended up on this iceberg. Sausage Party. What if your grocery store came to life, and it was aggressively raunchy, angry, and existentially depressed? That's Sausage Party. It's a 2016 animated film that follows Frank, a cheerful sausage, and his bun girlfriend, Brenda, in a supermarket where all food believes in the great beyond, a paradise waiting after humans buy them. When Frank discovers it's a lie to keep everyone calm, he tries to expose the truth. Cue religious collapse, violent rebellion, graphic deaths, and every adult joke you can imagine. There's also an orgy somewhere in the mix. By the end, the film throws in a final twist that blatantly reminds you the characters are animated and voiced by actors. Because why not smash the fourth wall while you're at it? You can see why it's on this list. China, Kuwait, and Malaysia banned Sausage Party outright for explicit sexual content, graphic violence, and language that crossed every possible line at once. Singapore allowed it only after heavy cuts. Even in the United States, the film was strictly limited to adult audiences, with theaters posting warnings because parents kept bringing kids anyway, and then acting surprised when the talking hot dog started talking about orgies. Sausage Party took a medium most people still think of as kids stuff and turned it into an exploration of existential dread, religious satire, and aggressively adult humor. People just aren't used to animation being this grown up. Attack on Titan. A quiet little town sits behind massive stone walls. People are doing their daily chores. Kids are playing in the fields, and for a minute, all seems well. But then you look and see a giant, naked humanoid peering over the wall. Seconds later, people are grabbed, bitten in half, and swallowed while screaming. That's how Attack on Titan opens. In the anime, humanity survives by hiding behind 3 enormous walls to avoid being eaten by titans. Gigantic, human-shaped monsters with no apparent purpose beyond cannibalism. Eren Yeager has always wanted to eradicate them. And when one of these attacks kills his mother, it finally pushes him and his friends, Mikasa and Armin, to join the military. Their job is simple and suicidal. Fly around with swords and hope they're fast enough to not get eaten. Okay, that's not all it is, but you get the premise. Attack on Titan premiered in 2013 and quickly became a global hit. You could not scroll on the internet without seeing someone hit this pose. It was praised for its tension, brutal honesty, and willingness to kill characters without warning. It also didn't shy away from political themes, mass death, war crimes, and the uncomfortable idea that humans are very good at becoming the very monsters they set out to destroy. And as we've established, anything beyond Pleasant Goat and Big Big Wolf isn't passing censor boards with flying colors. So in 2015, China banned Attack on Titan outright. Officials cited concerns over youth development, pointing to graphic violence, disturbing imagery, and morally complex themes. Which is government speak for, this is way too intense and asks too many uncomfortable questions. Characters are eaten alive on screen. Children die. Authority figures lie constantly. And the line between a clear hero and villain dissolves fast. Other countries followed with their own objections. Malaysia censored the show heavily, sometimes slapping black bars over anything that looked even slightly indecent, including the Titans themselves, 'cause they're mostly naked, so they had to give them underpants. Russia joined in later, banning the series in 2021 over concerns about its psychological impact on minors and its bleak worldview. Despite, or maybe because of, the bans, Attack on Titan only grew bigger, developing one of the most enthusiastic fan bases out there. They've been called insensitive and weird for complaining when episode 73 of the final season was delayed due to a real-life earthquake in Japan. And some have even tracked down the show's directors and threatened them for not matching fan preferences. Tier 2. The Simpsons. Imagine getting the drop on who's going to win your country's presidential election in 2024, 24 years ahead of time, as a throwaway joke in a cartoon. That's the kind of reputation The Simpsons has built over the years. Somewhere along the line, people stopped seeing it as just a sitcom and started treating it like a low-budget oracle. Elections, corporate mergers, sports outcomes, disasters, you name it. If it happened, someone can usually point to an old episode and say, yeah, they called it. Add the internet, a few conspiracy-minded fans, and the fact that people behind the show have recently shown up in places and documents nobody wants to be associated with, and you get a messy reputation and a never-ending supply of controversy fuel. At its core, though, The Simpsons is still about the Springfield family. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, using satire, exaggeration, and bad behavior to poke at culture, politics, and social norms. The humor works because it's willing to be uncomfortable, and sometimes that discomfort turns into actual consequences. Take the episode 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, for example. Homer attends a sumo match in Japan and treats it like a baseball game. He eats loudly, ignores the setting, panics when a wrestler steals his pretzel, knocks the guy out, and then throws the Emperor of Japan into a crate full of sumo thongs. The rest of the episode is a parade of misunderstandings, accidental insults, and enthusiastic cultural misfires. That's the joke. Americans abroad being loud, clueless, and deeply embarrassing. Japan never aired the episode. Broadcasters in Japan, Hong Kong, and other parts of the region quietly avoided it entirely, deciding it was easier to pretend it didn't exist. This wasn't an isolated case. China banned the show in 2006 alongside other foreign animated series. The official explanation was that they were trying to protect local animation and limit foreign influence on children. The show eventually resurfaced years later on streaming platforms, although some episodes never made it back. Venezuela pulled The Simpsons from morning television in 2008, arguing that it was inappropriate for children. Officials worried kids might imitate Homer's behavior, which is fair if you consider the fact that the man has violent tendencies and is borderline alcoholic. In 2012, Iran banned the sale of Simpsons toys, claiming the characters promoted immoral behavior and unhealthy lifestyles. None of this slowed the show down. Episodes kept airing, reruns never left rotation, and the predictions continued. Despite many people debunking the so-called prophetic powers, it still hasn't stopped people from treating it like a warning label for the future, though. Record of Ragnarok. Imagine opening Netflix to see a battle between gods and humans, and one god's looks has you side-eyeing the design team. That's what happened in India when Record of Ragnarok premiered. The show, based on the manga Shumatsu no Valkyrie, kicks off with the gods of every mythology holding their once-a-millennium meeting. And this time, they've decided to wipe out humanity. They're just about ready to erase humans from existence when Brunhilde, a no-nonsense Valkyrie, convinces them to give humanity one last shot. A tournament called Ragnarok. The rules are straightforward. 13 gods fight 13 humans in one-on-one battles to the death. If humans win 7 fights, they get another 1,000 years. If they lose, that's it for the whole planet. The matches take place in the Valhalla arena, and there's added stakes to this. Ragnarok is fought between souls, so when a human dies in the arena, their soul is gone forever. The battles are intense. Zeus, Shiva, Thor, and Poseidon step in for the gods, while humans said Adam, Jack the Ripper, Nikola Tesla, and Nostradamus. History and myth mashed together with no concern for historical accuracy. Then came the controversy. In the Indian release, Shiva, one of Hinduism's most sacred gods, was redesigned. Traditionally, Shiva is the destroyer, depicted with long hair, 2 arms, and tiger skin clothing. The anime turned him into a young man with short hair, blue tattoos, 4 arms, and no shirt. For many Hindu viewers, this creative choice was disrespectful and misleading, because it altered the appearance of a deeply sacred figure in a way that stripped away its religious meaning. The backlash was strong enough that Netflix removed Shiva from the trailer, and when complaints continued, they pulled Record of Ragnarok from their streaming service in India altogether. Hitting the trail for Hallelujah Land. An early 1930s cartoon riverboat slides across the screen. Everything is bouncing, the music is blaring, and nobody ever stands still. A smiling pig is in charge. Everyone's singing, and the animation ignores gravity completely. If you're a studio exec in 1931, this looks like a hit already. If you're watching it now, you're about 10 seconds away from asking who thought this was a good idea. Released in 1931 as a Merry Melodies short, Hitting the Trail for Hallelujah Land was directed by Rudolf Ising, and was built to be noisy, fast, and funny. What it actually delivers, though, is a parade of racial caricatures lifted from minstrel shows, a type of early entertainment built around white performers in blackface acting out exaggerated black stereotypes, all animated with enthusiasm and zero restraint. This is where people usually say, well, it was a different time, and they're not wrong. It was also a time when domestic violence was treated as normal, which tells you how much that excuse is really worth. Blackface imagery was everywhere in American entertainment back then. Live theater, radio, film, and animation all treated exaggerated black features and accents as harmless comedy. Early cartoons didn't invent any of this. They pulled it straight from what already existed and then pushed it even further, because exaggeration is baked into how animation works. The cartoon barely pretends to care about its own plot. It follows Piggy, his girlfriend Fluffy, and his Uncle Tom, mostly as an excuse to jump from one gag to the next. It opens on a cheerful steamboat drifting down a river, with Piggy at the helm while 3 blackface caricatures play music on a harmonica, banjo, and bones. Meanwhile, Uncle Tom and Fluffy are riding a donkey cart toward the boat, because, well, why not? Piggy and Fluffy reunite, but the story immediately loses interest and coherence. Uncle Tom ends up trapped in a cemetery. Piggy fights 3 dancing skeletons to save him, and then Fluffy is kidnapped by a villain. Piggy rescues her, and that's the ending. At the time, Warner Brothers didn't see this as risky. These shorts played before movies were meant for general audiences, and were treated as disposable entertainment. Once they ran their course, the assumption was simple: no one would care later. That assumption aged badly. By the 1960s, American culture started doing something it had avoided for decades, which was actually looking back. The civil rights movement forced media companies to confront what they had normalized for years. As people began to question how racism shaped media, Warner Brothers quietly pulled Hitting the Trail for Hallelujah Land and 10 other cartoons from circulation. Pokemon. It's Saturday afternoon in the late 90s. The kid is in front of the TV watching Pokemon, a cartoon about a 10-year-old named Ash who travels around collecting pocket monsters that fight on his behalf. His main partner is Pikachu, a yellow mouse thing that shoots electricity. The villains, Team Rocket, are 2 young adults who spend most episodes getting electrocuted, blasted into the sky, and somehow surviving, which already tells you the show isn't big on realism. In December 1997, what was meant to be just another regular episode took an unexpected turn. It was called Den-no Senshi Porygon, and it sent Ash, Pikachu, and the gang into a digital world to stop Team Rocket from messing with the computer system. Think early internet visuals complete with bright colors and lots of flashing lights. Near the end of the episode, Pikachu fires an electric attack that triggers an explosion filled with rapid red and blue flashes. Within minutes of the episode airing in Japan, children started experiencing seizures, dizziness, nausea, and blackouts. Hospitals filled up fast, and news helicopters showed up to cover the whole thing. By the end of the night, over 600 children were hospitalized, and nearly 12,000 more reported milder symptoms. This whole mess became known as Pokemon shock, and it triggered an immediate response. The episode was pulled the same day and permanently banned. It has never aired again, never been officially released, and will not show up in any legal Pokemon collection. And the character Porygon, who technically did nothing wrong, was sentenced to cartoon death by association. Pokemon was pulled off the air for months, while broadcasters panicked and regulators rushed to rewrite animation safety rules. After that, anime studios were stuck with strict limits on flashing lights, color intensity, and frame speed. One episode managed to permanently change how an entire industry animates explosions, which is honestly impressive in a very unfortunate way. Pokemon Shock was the beginning of the franchise's on-air troubles, but it definitely wasn't the end. In 2001, Saudi Arabia banned Pokemon completely, saying that trading cards encouraged gambling and pushed ideas about evolution that clashed with the country's religious beliefs. In Turkey, the show was banned in 2000 after reports that two kids jumped off balconies thinking they had superhuman abilities like the Pokemon. And in schools all over the world, Pokemon cards got banned for the most obvious reason possible. When you mix passionate kids with endless arguments over rare cards, the nurse's office suddenly becomes the busiest place in the building. But despite seizures, government bans, and playground chaos, the franchise went on to make billions. Ash never aged, Team Rocket kept getting electrocuted, and Pikachu went on to become one of the most recognizable characters on Earth. Happy Tree Friends. Happy Tree Friends. A blue moose is chopping wood in a bright, cheerful forest. Birds are chirping, and it feels like the start of a perfectly normal cartoon morning. You expect mild shenanigans, maybe a bonk on the head and some laughter. Instead, the axe slips, ricochets, and sets off a chain reaction. Seconds later, there's blood, real screaming, and a level of violence that absolutely does not belong in a show that looked this harmless 5 seconds ago. That is what a typical Happy Tree Friends episode looks like. The series launched online in 2000, created by Rode Montijo, Aubrey Ankrum, and Ken Navarro. Visually, it looks like your average kids show. Bright colors, rounded shapes, smiling animals. But underneath that, the entire show is built around graphic injuries and deaths triggered by simple everyday mistakes. There are no villains and no lessons, just cute characters meeting brutal ends again and again. The episodes are short, mostly silent and easy to click by accident. Characters squeak instead of talking, so there's no context, which just makes the violence hit even harder. Adults see it as dark slapstick, but for kids, it's a recipe for childhood trauma, and that's why governments worldwide decided to step in. In 2008, Russian Media Culture Protection Department decided they had seen enough tiny woodland suffering. They flagged the show for promoting violence and harming children's moral development.
But that is about all we can show you, because the Happy Tree Friends have been taken off the air in Russia after a government body decided they promoted violence and abuse.
The TV channel airing it tried to resist at first, but they backed down when they realized the government was absolutely not joking about it. By 2021, a court in St. Petersburg officially banned the show, along with a few anime titles. They explained that the series contained cruelty, damaged spiritual education, and contradicted the whole idea of raising kids to be gentle human beings. Hard to argue with that when every episode ends with at least one character going through a Final Destination-style ordeal. Parents all over the world have shared the same concern. They think the violence might influence their kids, and honestly, you can't blame them. To be fair, creators actually try to warn everyone. Their website spells it out, and each episode starts with a giant warning that might as well say, "Please do not blame us for what your child sees next." Yet, kids still sneak in to watch it, because the characters are brightly colored and look like they belong on lunchboxes. Cat takes 3 girls into a cramped apartment bathroom to do adult stuff while a party rages outside. Someone opens the door. More people pile in. And before you can process what you're watching, the police make an appearance and chaos breaks out. A gun goes off, the toilet explodes, water floods the room, and the talking cat slips away like this kind of thing happens to him twice a week. That scene is from Fritz the Cat. Released in 1972 and directed by Ralph Bakshi, Fritz the Cat was a deliberate middle finger to the idea that animation was automatically wholesome. Bakshi took a talking animal, dropped him into a dirty, exaggerated version of 1960s America, and let him drift through intimacy, drugs, political posturing, and violence with zero interest in consequences or moral lessons. The result was historic and immediately controversial. Fritz the Cat became the first animated film to receive an X rating in the United States. That rating alone was enough to send regulators in other countries into full panic mode. Malaysia and New Zealand blocked it for its over-the-line content. The Maldives and Singapore cited its mix of violence, drugs, profanity, and explicit material. Spain banned it for being offensive and explicit. Across the board, the concern remained the same. Ironically, the film was a massive success. It grossed over $90 million worldwide, making it one of the most successful independent films of its time. Critics in the 1970s praised its satire, social commentary, and raw style, even as others tore into it for racial stereotyping, graphic content, and what they saw as an unfocused, chaotic plot. Whether people loved it or hated it, nobody missed the point. But there was someone who hated it more than the censor boards, and that was creator Robert Crumb. The film was actually based on Crumb's underground comic strip, and that relationship did not end well. Crumb, who leaned left politically, felt the film mocked the political left and misunderstood his work. When he saw the finished film in early 1972, he hated it. He tried to distance himself from the project, and when his lawsuit failed to get him what he wanted, he made his feelings clear in another way. Later that same year, Crumb published a comic where Fritz is brutally killed and announced he was done with the character forever. He also wrote directly to the filmmakers, telling them not to use his characters again. Tier 3. Sunday Go to Meetin' Time. A man skips church to roll dice, gets caught, runs off again, tries to steal a few chickens, and gets knocked out for his trouble. The next thing he knows, he's standing in a courtroom in hell while a demon judge reads out his sins like a shopping list. This scene is from the 1936 Merry Melodies short Sunday Go to Meetin' Time, directed by Fritz Freleng and released by Warner Brothers. It was marketed as a light-hearted cartoon about a black community preparing for Sunday church, which sounds harmless enough until you realize that it leaned hard on racial caricatures. The characters are drawn with exaggerated features and visual cues signaling laziness, ignorance, and superstition as quickly as possible. The jokes don't really come from timing or clever setups. Instead, they come from reducing a whole community to a bundle of stereotypes about gambling, chaos, and bad morals. Religion isn't treated like faith either. It's treated like a setup for laughs, and the so-called moral lesson only works if you accept the stereotypes are doing all the heavy lifting. When it was released, the reaction outside the United States was what you'd expect from normal people. The British Board of Film Censors rejected it outright, and the cartoon was banned in both Australia and Germany. Even by 1930 standards, it was seen as offensive. But unsurprisingly, it kept circling in the US trade. Papers praised it using language that leaned fully into racist framing, and that approval helped keep it alive for years. By industry standards, it was considered a success. That changed much later. In 1968, Warner Brothers took the hint and removed Sunday Go to Meetin' Time and the rest of the censored 11 from television once it became clear they never should have been airing in the first place. School Days. Imagine you're a Japanese TV executive in 2007. You've been airing teen romance anime for weeks, and today's final episode should be nothing more than blushes and awkward breakups. Instead, what you get is a girl who skips the confession entirely and takes a page straight out of Yuka Takaoka's book. Yeah, that episode is not airing. That's School Days. This show presents itself as a harmless high school romance. Train rides, shy glances, love triangles, the usual stuff. Underneath that, the story slowly falls apart around Makoto, an indecisive teenage boy who dates whoever's in front of him, refuses to genuinely commit to one partner, and assumes nothing bad will happen. The series lets the emotional damage pile up quietly until it finally explodes. And the ending is where everything went off the rails. The finale shows one of the girls Makoto has been involved with, claiming to be pregnant, stabbing him to death after she can no longer tolerate his cheating. His original girlfriend then retaliates, cutting her open to confirm whether she was actually pregnant, killing her in the process. Up until the bloodshed, everyone was just a bunch of ordinary students, or so it seemed. Japanese broadcasters pulled the episode before it aired and replaced the entire time slot with footage of boats and European scenery. There was no explanation on screen, just boats. That alone told viewers something had gone very wrong. The decision wasn't only about shock value. Just days earlier, a 16-year-old girl in Western Japan had killed her father with a small axe because, according to her, she didn't like him. He was a 45-year-old local cop, found dead in bed, and the girl was discovered covered in blood at home. With something tragic happening just days before, airing an anime episode where a girl just stabs her boyfriend to death felt irresponsible, so the finale got pulled. China went further and banned the entire series, pointing to its mix of adult content, emotional manipulation, and graphic violence. All this and rabbits too. Picture a movie theater in 1941. You're waiting for the main film. The lights are still half up, and a Bugs Bunny cartoon comes on because that's what cartoons are for. Quick laughs, just something to sit through before the feature. Then the hunter shows up on screen. He's unarmed, but everyone watching knows exactly what he's supposed to be. He has big lips, bug eyes, a thick accent, and his every move is exaggerated. The audience laughs right away before Bugs even does anything remotely funny because they've already identified the joke. All this and Rabbit Stew was released in September 1941 under Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies and was directed by Tex Avery. It also ended up being the last Bugs Bunny short directed by Tex Avery to be released. It came out when Avery had already left Warner Brothers, so his name doesn't appear in the credits. The story itself is simple and familiar. A hunter chases Bugs. Bugs embarrasses the hunter at every turn. They end up gambling, and the hunter loses everything, including his clothes and his dignity. Bugs walks off, pleased with himself, and the cartoon ends right there. The real issue lies in who the cartoon is mocking. Reviews back then openly described the hunter as Sambo, or a little boy. At the time, that language didn't raise eyebrows, even though Sambo was a racist label rooted in colonial and Jim Crow-era stereotypes. It flattened black characters into something childish and foolish, and audiences were just supposed to laugh the moment they saw it. Critics loved the short. Trade papers praised how funny it was and how audiences would eat it up. They highlighted the hunter's confusion and humiliation as the main source of laughs, without questioning why his shame was the joke. Decades later, the question couldn't be ignored. By 1968, Warner Brothers reviewed its catalog and decided All This and Rabbids 2 was no longer acceptable for circulation. Dead Man Wonderland. Ever wonder what would happen if the government built a prison that doubled as a theme park and forced its inmates to fight to the death for the amusement of paying customers? That's basically the premise of Dead Man Wonderland, a manga by Jinsei Kataoka and Kazuma Kondo that ran from 2007 to 2013 and was later adapted into a 12-episode anime in 2011. The show really kicks off when a mysterious figure covered in blood and crimson armor massacres an entire classroom, killing everyone except one student. Within days, he's framed for the crime, sentenced to a prison on death row, and fitted with a poison-injecting collar that can only be neutralized if he earns a strange candy-like medicine through games, performances, or deadly competitions. Inside the prison, the rules are simple: survive or die. Some inmates can manipulate their blood into weapons, and others are forced to fight each other while anonymous spectators pay to watch the carnage. When it was time to adapt the manga into anime, the studio knew all hell would break loose if they didn't try to tone things down. So they blurred or cut extreme gore and violence. They even censored a transgender character, which fans rightly found offensive. Even with those edits, the show's reputation only got darker. Chinese regulators banned it outright, pointing to the mix of minors, executions, and spectacle as too extreme for broadcast. The anime adapted only the first 21 chapters of the manga. Manglobe, the studio behind it, removed characters, cut storylines, and rushed the pacing. When it went under, there was no continuation. Tier 4. Uncle Tom's Bungalow. What if someone took the concept of slavery and turned it into one of the most offensive cartoon shorts ever made, then played it for laughs on a Sunday afternoon? That's Uncle Tom's Bungalow. Released in 1937 as part of Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies series and directed by Tex Avery, the short was pitched as a parody of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The original novel was deadly serious. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote it in 1852 to expose the cruelty of slavery, and it helped shape public opinion against it before the Civil War. The cartoon takes that legacy and strips it for parts. The plot barely pretends to care about the source material. A black man is sold early on like a household appliance. Slavery becomes slapstick, and the tension revolves around debts and punchlines instead of freedom or violence. When Uncle Tom reappears at the end, suddenly wealthy, the narrator jokes about Social Security before revealing the money came from cheating at dice. The joke lands squarely on racist stereotypes that were already well worn by the 1930s. The humor depends entirely on caricature. Faces are distorted, speech is turned into a joke, and the characters are presented as naive, dishonest, or foolish before they even open their mouths. Even the term Uncle Tom, which Stowe intended as a tragic figure meant to highlight moral cruelty, had already morphed into an insult. The cartoon leans into that version without hesitation. You can see why it's on this list. At the time, nobody blinked. Trade papers called it clever and amusing. It played in theaters, people laughed, and the studio moved on. Decades later, Warner Brothers finally revisited its catalog and decided some things couldn't be defended anymore. By the late 1960s, Uncle Tom's Bungalow was pulled from American television. Jungle Jitters. If you go watch this short looking for a moral lesson, you won't find much beyond the idea that the jungle is loud, dangerous, and full of people ready to cook you alive. Released in 1938 by Warner Brothers and directed by Fritz Freleng, the cartoon follows Elmer, a dog-faced traveling salesman who wanders into a jungle with a suitcase full of random goods. He thinks he's there to sell household items. The villagers, meanwhile, see his arrival as dinner. Yes, cannibalism. and the entire short run on that misunderstanding, with Elmer pitching products while the people around him quietly plan to cook him. The cartoon doesn't bother giving the villagers any depth. They exist purely as a setup for jokes and are portrayed as completely primitive and disconnected from civilization. Their culture centers on cannibalism, confusion, and chaos, and the humor comes entirely from treating them as incapable of understanding anything else. Things escalate when the tribe's queen decides she's going to marry Elmer on the spot, turning the rest of the short into a string of panic gags that end with him jumping into a boiling pot to escape. His final words were a half-finished wish that his captors get indigestion.
I hope they all get indigestion. I hope.
So much good that'd do. Audiences in the 1930s somehow thought this was hilarious. But by the 1960s, times had changed and Jungle Jitters didn't age well. Warner Brothers quietly took it off TV in 1968. Elfin lied. Ever wonder where Stranger Things got the idea for 11? Well, part of it comes from a 2004 anime called Elfin Lied, which the Duffer Brothers themselves called Ultraviolet E.T., whatever that means. The show kicks off with Lucy, a mutant called a Diclonius, breaking out of a secret lab. She's got small horns and invisible telekinetic arms called vectors that slice through guards like they're nothing. She gets shot, but instead of dying, the injury triggers a split personality. And now there's Killer Lucy and the innocent, childlike New. The next day, 2 college students find her naked and bleeding on a beach and take her in. From there, domestic awkwardness collides with extreme gore. Blood and body parts fly. People die in brutal ways, and nudity shows up without warning. The first 7 minutes alone were enough to make most viewers run for the door. The anime adapts the manga, but cuts and alters huge chunks, leading to a rushed ending and underdeveloped storylines. Fans noticed inconsistencies, plot holes, and the main character, who some called a straight-up psychopath. Critics weren't gentle either. Scenes of nudity and violence were called overly blatant, and the voice acting, both Japanese and English, was heavily criticized. Elfin Lied's content caused trouble beyond criticism. China and Russia banned it, citing the combination of extreme violence, gore, and adult content as harmful for young viewers. Despite its controversy, Elfin Lied left its mark. The Duffer Brothers have cited it as inspiration for Eleven's character in Stranger Things. The influence is obvious in Eleven's powers, the lab experimentation, and the darker edges of a seemingly innocent story. Angel Puss. If someone made a cartoon today about a kid being paid to drown a cat, PETA and every well-meaning citizen on the internet would probably have an aneurysm. In 1944, it was treated as peak entertainment. Angel Puss opens with Sambo, a black boy drawn with exaggerated blackface-style features walking across a bridge with a sack. Inside the sack is a cat, and his job is to drown it. He drags the bag like it's a chore he doesn't want to do, hesitates for a moment, and that hesitation saves the cat. The animal slips out, fills the sack with bricks, hides nearby, and lets Sambo throw it into the water, thinking the job's done. Then, the cat paints itself white, sticks on a halo, and starts pretending to be a ghost. That's when the cartoon fully commits to terrorizing the kid for laughs. The short was released in June 1944 by Warner Brothers and directed by Chuck Jones, one of the key figures behind Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Porky Pig. The racial caricature is impossible to miss, and the entire premise rests on 2 ideas played for humor. A black child is disposable comic relief, and killing an animal is treated like a silly errand. Even for the 1940s, that combination didn't sit right with everyone. On October 7, 1944, Herman Hill called it out directly in an editorial for the Pittsburgh Courier. He reported that black theatergoers were actively protesting the cartoon, especially in Los Angeles. The backlash got worse because Angel Puss was being shown alongside March of Time's Americans for All, a short Warner Brothers ordered to play nationwide to promote racial tolerance. Seeing a cartoon built on racist stereotypes paired with an anti-prejudice film made the contradiction impossible to ignore. March of Time later clarified they had no control over the pairing and admitted it showed poor judgment. None of that criticism reached a mainstream film press. Trade magazines praised Angel Puss without hesitation. Box Office called it a delectable bit that played on colored boys' fear of the supernatural and promised hearty chuckles as the cat terrorized him, until the end when he eventually kills it. Yes, not the ending you might have expected, but it was the 1940s. Despite protests from black newspapers, Warner Brothers pushed the short anyway. It ran briefly. Then in 1968, it was pulled from circulation. Tier 5. Waltz with Bashir. Ever had a nightmare that felt too real to be a dream? One where you're running away from 26 rabid dogs tearing through your city? That's how Waltz with Bashir opens. The film starts in 2006 with Israeli filmmaker Ari Folman talking to his friend Boaz. Boaz keeps having the same nightmare about those dogs. At first it sounds impossible, but he insists it's real. Back in the 1982 Lebanon War, he had to shoot every single one of them, one by one, just to keep villagers from noticing soldiers had moved in. That moment cracks something open for Ari. He realizes he has buried his own memories of the war so deep he can barely remember being there. From there, Ari tracks down old friends, soldiers, and a war reporter to piece together what happened. Slowly, he uncovers the truth. His unit was at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, while hundreds of civilians were massacred by Lebanese militia, with Israeli forces standing by and firing flares. Ari didn't pull the trigger, but the film shows how guilt can feel like complicity. Animation gives the story its edge. Surreal visuals, shifting timelines, and distorted recollections let viewers feel the fragments of memory instead of just seeing them. By the end, the animation melts into real news footage of the massacre, and the impact hits harder than words ever could. Lebanon banned the film immediately. It is an Israeli production, which was technically illegal to screen anyway. But the real issue is that the movie forces viewers to see the war through the eyes of soldiers, some of whom were considered the enemy. Governments do not like that kind of perspective. Clean Pastures. If heaven looked like a Harlem nightclub and the angels had to compete for attention, that would mean real life is basically this short called Clean Pastures. In the cartoon, a black angel stands on a sidewalk next to a sign that promises entry to heaven, but nobody pays him any mind. People keep walking, heading into nightclubs, rolling dice, drinking and dancing. Up in the clouds, heaven notices it's being ignored and decides to shake things up, turning the afterlife into a swinging, jazz-filled, gambling-heavy spectacle called Paradise. Angels and St. Peter appear as minstrel-style caricatures, and even the devil tries to sneak in at the end just to enjoy the music. Clean Pastures came out in 1937, directed by Friz Freleng as a parody of The Green Pastures, a 1936 film that retold Bible stories with an all-black cast. That film was already controversial for its depiction of God and biblical figures. Warner Brothers took the concept, stripped away nuance, and made the afterlife a non-stop party that doubled as a vehicle for racial caricatures. People were shown as primitive and ignorant. The angelic hierarchy was used for comedy, and the line between entertainment and offensive stereotype blurred completely. From the start, censors had problems with it. Hollywood's production code flagged the cartoon for mocking heaven, turning gambling and drinking into jokes, and ignoring the rules around religious depictions. The depiction of a black heaven only made it more uncomfortable. Despite that, the cartoon ran briefly, and trade publications barely noticed the problematic content. Over time, critics and historians started looking back. Scholars noted that black audiences had largely ignored it at the time, but the stereotypes were being broadcast to everyone else. By 1968, Warner Brothers pulled Clean Pastures from circulation. Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs. What if someone took a classic bedtime story and turned it into a cartoon filled with blackface, X-rated characters, and murder-for-hire jokes? That's Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs. The short came out in January 1943, directed by Bob Clampett. It's a swing-era parody of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, with jazz music and an all-black cast of characters. At first, it sounds clever, maybe even inclusive, but the cartoon is a non-stop parade of blackface imagery, adult-coded characters, and wartime racism. Nearly every role relies on a stereotype. The Queen is a broad mammy figure, So White is hypersexualized, and the prince struts around in a zoot suit, a flashy, oversized suit popular in the 1940s, with gold teeth. Even the opening child narrator is a Pickaninny caricature. The short also weaves in World War II propaganda. Motion Picture Exhibitor called it very funny. The Film Daily praised it as an amusing satire and casually used racist terms when describing the characters. Clearly, the audience it was made for was being entertained, not questioned. Some viewers did push back, though. In April 1943, the NAACP formally protested the short and urged Warner Brothers to withdraw it. Over time, Coal Black became a key example when critics discussed racism in early animation. By 1968, United Artists, which controlled the Warner Brothers cartoon library then, officially pulled it from circulation. Tin Pan Alley Cats. This one was also directed by Bob Clampett, and this time he decided to push everything to the extreme. After Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs, Clampett wanted to make another wild cartoon. And that's how Tin Pan Alley Cats came to be. It was released in 1943 as part of the Merry Melodies series, and it shared the same jazzy soundtrack, frantic animation, and the same racial caricatures that eventually got it banned. The story followed a black alley cat, clearly modeled after jazz musician Fats Waller. The cat stands in front of two doors. One leads to the Kit Kat Club, the other to Uncle Tomcat Mission. Someone warns him to avoid the club, which is full of wine, women, and music. But of course, that only makes him more curious. He immediately heads inside. At the club, the cat gets so caught up in the music that he passes out and has a wild dream. In it, he meets giant versions of Joseph Stalin, a leader of the Soviet Union, Hideki Tojo, the Japanese prime minister during World War II, and he who must not be named. Oh no, not him. The dream terrifies him, and when he wakes, he leaves the partying behind and joins the mission band instead. Clampett's defenders like to argue that the cartoon was bursting with creativity and jazz, but by the late 1960s, the studio could no longer ignore what it was built on: blackface-style animation, a warped parody of Fats Waller, Uncle Tom jokes, and flat stereotypes about black neighborhoods. That's why Tin Pan Alley Cats was pulled for good. This is the banned kids show Iceberg. Tier 1. It's a Dog's Life from Ren and Stimpy. Ren and Stimpy always had a reputation for pushing boundaries, but this episode went so far that even longtime fans were stunned. We're talking about the lost episode from Season 4, Episode 12, titled It's a Dog's Life. If you missed the 90s, Ren and Stimpy were the punk rock of cartoons. It was ugly, loud, and obsessed with bodily fluids. But this specific episode crossed the line from gross to psychological torture. The episode begins in a way no kid's cartoon ever should. Ren, a tiny chihuahua, and Stimpy, his clueless cat friend, are literally on death row at an animal pound. They're chained up, marched down a hallway, and about to be put in a gas chamber. Right before the switch is pulled, a wealthy old woman appears and rescues them. She brings them home in a limo and gives them fancy new names. Ren becomes Abraham, while Stimpy becomes Leviticus. She treats them like purebred pets. For a moment, everything seems perfect, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. Soon after their arrival, Ren spots what he thinks is a sleeping dog in a basket. When he pokes it, the animal crumbles into dust. It wasn't asleep, it was stuffed, and from there, everything spirals. The granny insists they act like proper dogs, and every mistake earns a punishment. When Stimpy accidentally damages her couch, her giant stone-faced butler, Mr. O, walks in and snaps his limbs. Dinner is even worse. She serves them gravel, which shatters Ren's teeth. Whenever they cry out in pain, she simply hoses them down, convinced they're being naughty. Later, she takes them to a clinic to have them neutered. At night, she locks them outside in a graveyard, leaving them surrounded by tombstones and creepy ambient sounds. Terrified, Ren and Stimpy eventually try to run away, but a police officer catches them and gives them a horrific choice: return to the granny or go back to the pound to be executed. They choose the granny. When they get back, the story hits its final disturbing turn. The old woman is lying on the floor, dead from lead poisoning. Her butler quietly inherits everything she owned, including the pets. Then, the episode cuts to its chilling ending. Ren and Stimpy have been taxidermied. They're mounted in her mansion, while the butler casually dusts their lifeless bodies like furniture. Yes, the main characters die and end the episode as stuffed decorations. It's obvious why Nickelodeon pulled the episode quickly. Even MTV refused to show it for years. When it did return on Nicktoons, complaints rolled in, and the network pulled it again. Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone from Arthur. It took just one episode of this long-running PBS show to get an entire state to pull it off the air. Before the trouble started, Arthur was the PBS golden child. A polite cartoon about an aardvark in glasses that has been teaching toddlers about sharing, reading, and emotional intelligence since 1996. You'd think after 20-plus seasons, nothing from the show could possibly cause outrage. But you'd be wrong. In 2019, Season 22, Episode 1 dropped, and the state of Alabama decided it was a menace to society. The episode's called Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone. The plot kicks off when Arthur and his friends overhear that their teacher, Mr. Ratburn, is getting married. They catch bits of a phone call about someone named Patty, and instantly assumes that she's a bridezilla who'll turn their fun teacher into a homework-assigning dictator. Instead of, asking, they decide to intervene. They spy on him at a dinner, edit together a fake, laid-back video to help him find love with someone else, and even write a cheesy love poem full of typos. After that, they try to set him up with a random librarian. They even try to sweeten the deal by bribing her with high-end truffles they bought from a chill, friendly chocolatier named Patrick. The plan fails miserably because, surprisingly, you cannot force a government employee to date your teacher just because you gave her fancy candy. Then comes the big twist. The kids crash the wedding ready to object, only to realize they got everything wrong. Mr. Ratburn really is getting married, but Patty isn't the bride. She's his sister. The person standing at the altar is Patrick. Yes, the nice guy who sold him the bribe candy earlier. Mr. Ratburn is marrying a guy. There was no dramatic reveal, no rainbow flags, and no monologue about acceptance. Just a wedding scene. A quick kiss, a smile, and the core group of friends watching in surprise. Francine, the group's resident athlete and skeptic, breaks the tension by admitting the whole thing is actually kind of romantic. The show producers thought it was all harmless entertainment, but not everyone agreed. Alabama Public Television refused to air the episode, saying they didn't want to expose children to gay marriage. Instead, they replaced it with a rerun of an older episode and hoped no one would notice. And well, people noticed. Advocacy groups like GLAAD immediately called the move mean-spirited censorship, pointing out that public TV is supposed to represent all families, not just the ones lawmakers are comfortable with. The internet picked up the story and it spread fast. Reddit threads broke down the situation. Twitter called it the dumbest controversy of 2019. And conservative groups like 1 Million Moms launched petitions accusing PBS of promoting same-sex marriage. Even former Trump advisor Sebastian Gorka joined in calling it proof of a culture war. The funniest part of all of this is that the episode itself makes zero deal out of it. The wedding is just a background event for the kids realizing their teacher has a life. Dad Baby from Bluey. Disney is famous for locking controversial content in the vault. Usually that means old cartoons with outdated stereotypes. But recently, they applied that same treatment to a 7-minute clip of a dog in a kiddie pool. If you've never seen Bluey, the first thing you need to know is that it's Australia's most beloved preschool show. It's centered on a dog family that turns everyday moments into heartfelt adventures. Parents love putting on the show for their kids because it feels like real family life. It's messy, funny, emotional, and sometimes a little too accurate. But then we arrive at Season 2, Episode 13, titled Dad Baby. It kicks off with Bandit, the dad, deciding to play a game where he's the one having a baby. He slips his younger daughter, Bingo, into a baby carrier hidden under his shirt, making himself look pregnant. It was supposed to be a silly family roleplay, but Bandit takes it way too seriously. He starts acting like an expectant parent, waddling through the house, groaning about back pain, and demanding weird food combinations like pickles dipped in vanilla ice cream. His kids, Bluey and Bingo, go along with it completely, turning their living room into a full-on delivery ward. They even set up a kiddie pool in the backyard. When it's time to deliver, the baby Bluey grabs a toy stethoscope and shouts, "Push, Daddy," while the family's neighbor, Pat, shows up to offer encouragement. After a few over-the-top grunts and splashes, Bandit finally gives birth. Bingo comes out of his shirt, now smeared in white sunscreen to mimic a newborn's coating. Everyone cheered. Bandit collapsed in exhaustion, and the mom, Chili, casually declined to join the next round of play. Audiences generally praised the episode for explaining the mechanics of childbirth without traumatizing the target demographic. However, the reception in the US was different. When the distribution rights crossed the Pacific, Disney's Standards and Practices team reviewed the episode and panicked. They thought the birth scene was too detailed and worried that preschoolers might start asking uncomfortable questions. To prevent that from happening, they banned the entire episode from Disney Plus and Disney Junior. 4 years later, Bluey's creators uploaded Dad Baby to YouTube themselves, and it instantly blew up, generating millions of views without causing the societal collapse Disney execs predicted. While some people still argue that Dad Baby did more good than harm, and so it didn't deserve to be banned, there's an entry in Tier 2 that's so full of inappropriate innuendos that people are surprised it was allowed to go on air in the first place. Rude removal from Dexter's Laboratory. If you missed out on the 90s, Dexter's Laboratory is about a boy genius hiding a massive secret lab in his bedroom from his clueless parents, while his annoying sister Dee Dee constantly wrecks his experiments. In 1998, someone on the team had a genius idea. What if Dexter invented a machine that literally removes someone's rudeness? The story is simple. Dexter invents a machine called the Rude Removal System, which he claims can literally suck the rudeness out of a person and trap it. His sister Dee Dee enters the lab and starts teasing him, saying he's the rude one. He fires back. She mocks him harder, and within seconds they're wrestling. right into the machine. It activates by accident, and when the smoke clears, there are now 2 pairs of them. One set comes out overly polite, while the other set are super mean and, of course, rude. They stomp out of the chamber, yelling, flipping tables, and cursing like they were raised by sailors. They don't just swear once or twice. The entire episode is filled with bleeps. 13 in total. Every time the rude Dexter or Dee Dee open their mouths, another bleep goes off, including a few that are very obviously covering F-bombs. Everyone on the production team thought it was hilarious. The voice actors reportedly couldn't finish their lines without laughing, but Cartoon Network didn't share the enthusiasm. Executives approved the concept all the way through recording until they saw the final cut. It isn't shocking by modern standards, but you have to remember that in the 90s, things were different. Rude removal became a lost media legend for over a decade. But finally, in 2013, Adult Swim released it as a joke for the now grown fans who remembered the rumor. Mr. Skinny Legs from Peppa Pig. You usually expect governments to ban TV shows for violence or political propaganda, but that's not what happened here. Peppa Pig is a British show for preschoolers about wholesome family stuff. The show has been going strong for years, so you probably don't know that a season 1 episode titled Mr. Skinny Legs caused a national incident. The episode begins with Peppa and her little brother George playing with their dollhouse, setting up a pretend tea party for their toy family. Everything's going fine until George goes to the sink to get some water for the dolls and finds a spider. It's small, black, with long thin legs and a cartoonish smile. Instead of being scared, George gets excited. He calls Peppa over and proudly shows off his new friend. He even puts the spider inside a dollhouse bed like it's joining the tea party. Peppa, on the other hand, completely loses it. She screams, runs downstairs, and hides behind Daddy Pig, begging him to get rid of it. Daddy Pig does what any calm, responsible parent would do. He explains that spiders are tiny and harmless, but when he actually sees the thing up close, he jumps back too, nearly dropping his glasses. Eventually, Peppa realizes there's nothing to be afraid of. She names the spider Mr. Skinny Legs, invites it back to the dollhouse, and even offers it a slice of pretend cake. By the end, the whole family is laughing around the table while Mr. Skinny Legs crawls towards them. That logic holds up fine in the UK, where the scariest spider you'll meet is about the size of a button. But when the episode aired in Australia, many parents lost it. Spiders down there can actually hurt people. The country is crawling with redbacks and funnel webs, species that can hospitalize you in minutes. So when Daddy Pig looked straight into the camera and said spiders are harmless, Australian broadcasters saw a disaster waiting to happen. In 2012, the ABC network officially banned Mr. Skinny Legs, calling it inappropriate for Australian audiences. Buffalo Gals from Cow and Chicken. Some banned episodes are subtle, some are misunderstood, and then there's Buffalo Gals. Cow and Chicken is a 90s cartoon about a cow and a chicken who are somehow siblings. They have parents who we see as 2 pairs of legs with no upper bodies. We'll just call them Mom and Dad. The show is weird enough on a normal day, but in Season 2, Episode 2, the writers decided to base an entire plot on a very specific adult slang. The episode starts normally enough. Cow and Chicken are home when a motorcycle gang of large, muscular women with short haircuts, wearing flannel shirts and biker gear, burst through their front door and immediately start chewing the carpet. The gang calls themselves the Buffalo Gals, and Mom identifies them immediately. She tells Dad to relax because they're definitely not interested in him. From here, the episode doesn't slow down. If anything, it gets worse. The gals play softball outside and start tossing around terms like pitching and catching. If you don't know 90s slang, these terms refer to specific adult roles in same-sex relationships rather than baseball positions. Later, one of the gals develops what seems to be a crush on Cow and invites her to join. Cow joins their gang. Chicken tries to save her. And through it all, every scene leaned heavier and heavier into jokes that went straight over the heads of kids. The narrator wraps things up by explicitly refusing to state the moral of the story. He basically tells the audience that if they don't get the joke, they're not old enough to hear the explanation. Behind the scenes, even the creators later admitted things went too far. The show's creator, David Feiss, talked about it on a podcast years later, saying the jokes were poor judgment, and the episode only made it through because standards and practices in the 90s weren't exactly strict. Cartoon Network aired Buffalo Gals once. After that, they realized they'd made a mistake and scrubbed it from the schedule. You can't watch the episode on streaming services today, but it survives on the internet thanks to people who hit record on their VCRs back in 1998. Pingu's Dream from Pingu. Pingu is a classic Swiss claymation show about a penguin who went viral with this meme. It is usually just him fighting with his sister or eating fish. But in Season 1, Episode 26, the writers decided to see how much trauma they could inflict on toddlers in 5 minutes. The episode's called Pingu's Dream, and it starts off at bedtime in the igloo. Pingu's mom tucks him in, reads him a story, and everything looks cozy and peaceful. But once Pingu falls asleep, the episode takes a sharp turn from cozy to uncanny valley. The igloo around him starts to shake. Then, without warning, it lifts off the ground and drifts away into the sky, leaving Pingu's bed sitting all alone in the middle of a frozen wasteland. The bed suddenly sprouts a pair of long, thin legs and begins walking across the snow on its own. At first, Pingu giggles and plays along, bouncing on top of it as it strolls around. It's strange, but still innocent, until something dark appears on the horizon. Out of nowhere, a giant walrus rises out of the fog. It is a huge tan creature with tusks, bulging eyes, and a grin that looks uncomfortably realistic. It doesn't walk or slide like a real walrus. It floats, slowly, until it's inches away from Pingu. Then, it just lets out a deep, frightening laugh right in his face. The creature starts chasing Pingu. It eventually catches him and squeezes his head like a stress ball. Then it actually chomps down on the mattress and eats a chunk of it. Pingu eventually falls off a cliff and jolts awake in his real bed, panting and terrified. His mom rushes in and hugs him, trying to calm him down. The nightmare was over for Pingu, but for countless kids, it was only the beginning. The shock came from how suddenly the show changed its tone. Pingu was supposed to be soft, funny, comforting. Then out of nowhere, it gave children an eldritch horror show. Parents flooded broadcasters with complaints, saying their kids had nightmares or refused to sleep after they watched that episode. By 2003, the BBC quietly pulled the episode from UK circulation, marking it as too frightening for young audiences. It never appeared on VHS or reruns again, though it remained available in the US and later resurfaced on DVDs and Amazon Prime. Tier 3. Electric Soldier Porygon from Pokemon. Most banned cartoon episodes just offend parents and scare kids. This one actually put people in the hospital. Pokemon is a show where kids catch monsters and force them to fight for sport. This specific incident happened in Season 1, Episode 38, titled Electric Soldier Porygon. It aired in Japan on December 16, 1997. Ash, Misty, and Brock, the main characters, stop at a Pokemon Center, which is basically a hospital for injured Pokemon. But the building's teleportation system suddenly stops working. Nurse Joy brings in Dr. Akihabara, the guy who built the whole digital network, and he explains that Team Rocket stole his virtual Pokemon named Porygon, and they're messing with the system from the inside. Eventually, it's decided that Ash and his team will go to cyberspace and chase down Team Rocket. Inside the virtual world, everything looks futuristic and colorful. The trio rides a second Porygon through a neon blue grid filled with floating Pokeballs. They battle Team Rocket and their rogue Porygon, dodging digital missiles and fighting inside what looks like a computer's code. It's visually intense but still family-friendly, until Pikachu decided to use a Thunderbolt attack to destroy the antivirus missiles chasing them. The effect ran at 12 flashes per second, and even though it lasted only 4 seconds, that brief moment was all it took to spark one of the most infamous incidents in broadcasting history. Viewers began complaining of dizziness, nausea, and vision loss. Within hours, hospitals were flooded with children suffering seizures, fainting, or vomiting. In total, 685 people were hospitalized, with over 12,000 more reporting milder symptoms. Japan's media later dubbed it Pokemon Shock. TV Tokyo immediately pulled the episode, halted the entire Pokemon series for 4 months, and issued a public apology. News programs covered the incident, and in a moment of collective genius, they decided to replay the exact seizure-triggering clip on air, which immediately sent a second wave of viewers to the hospital. After that, the government stepped in, ran a full investigation, and introduced strict rules for TV animation. Rapid flashing images were banned, and every show now has to pass the Harding test so cartoons don't end up accidentally weaponizing the color red and blue ever again. Denno Senshi Porygon has never aired again, not even in its edited form. You can only find it now on illegal pirate sites or in medical textbooks about epilepsy. The fallout was so massive that the Pokemon responsible for the chaos, Porygon, was effectively blacklisted from the anime. Future seasons featured its evolutions, but never Porygon itself. See me, feel me, know me. From the Powerpuff Girls. People don't usually connect kindergarten superheroes with philosophies like free will and totalitarianism, but Season 5, Episode 12 of the Powerpuff Girls tried to change that. Powerpuff Girls is a show about 3 little girls created in a lab who fly around and punch criminals in the face before bedtime. In the episode that got banned, the writers decided to swap the punching for singing. The episode See Me, Feel Me, Know Me begins with the girls completely worn out from fighting every villain in their hometown of Townsville. So naturally, they start singing about wanting peace on Earth. Right after that, a raindrop hits the ground and magically grows into a rose. And then, out pops a dramatic little gnome. He promises to eliminate evil forever, but only if the girls give up their powers. At first, everything seems perfect. The villains disappear, the sun shines non-stop, and the townspeople dance in the streets singing Sunshine Down on Me. However, the longer this utopia lasts, the stranger it becomes. Everyone is suddenly wearing the same clothes, chanting the same lines, and praising the gnome like he's their spiritual leader. This is the moment when Professor Utonium steps in. Through his song Freedom Beef, he warns that peace without choice isn't real peace at all. It's control. Realizing they've been tricked, the girls demand their powers back. This leads to a dramatic showdown filled with guitar riffs, energy blasts, and fast-paced musical strings. Eventually, the girls overpower the gnome. He sings a final emotional line and disappears, returning Townsville to its usual chaotic but genuine state. So why was it banned? According to creator Craig McCracken, because of a misunderstanding. During one destruction scene, a wise old mystical elder character appears near steel beams sticking out of the rubble. The way the beams accidentally formed cross shapes made some executives think the scene resembled a Christian image, which is something the team never intended. To avoid potential backlash, Cartoon Network quietly shelved the episode in the US. Interestingly, it aired normally in many other countries, and fans worldwide praised it for its creative music and psychedelic 70s-style visuals. And this is still just a symbol that only kinda looks like something sacred. In Tier 4, we'll talk about an episode that fully dabbled into religious blasphemy and caused huge controversy. The Butt of the Jake. From My Gym Partner's a Monkey. You know an episode has really crossed the line when Cartoon Network looks at it twice, says, yeah, that's enough, and pulls it themselves. For context, My Gym Partner's a Monkey is a show about a human kid named Adam who gets sent to an animal school, thanks to a clerical error with his last name. His best friend is Jake Spider Monkey, who shows affection by making Adam's day objectively worse. Then Season 3, Episode 3 rolled around, and the writers suddenly chose violence. Jake became a menace, not just to Adam and the school, but to viewers' personal comfort levels as well. The episode is called The Butt of the Jake, and the whole thing revolves around Jake Spider Monkey becoming obsessed with his butt. It starts off light. Jake admires his butt in the school bathroom like it's a prized trophy. From there, he names each cheek like they're pets. The left cheek is Sally, and the right cheek is Buddy. Then he starts brushing them, moisturizing them, and even feeding them bananas he hides in his back pocket. Before long, this obsession is messing up his entire school day. In class, he makes it talk using ventriloquism. In the hallway, he parades it like it's a purebred show dog. Oh, and we're still talking about his butt. Adam is the only student at the school with human logic, so he organizes an intervention. Adam and the gang sit Jake down to explain that talking to your own butt is not normal behavior. But Jake gets defensive, declares that his butt is part of who he is, whatever that means, and storms off. Jake wants professional validation, so he goes to Dr. Babunsky, the school therapist, and for a moment, it looks like he might actually get real help, until the doctor proudly reveals that he named his cheeks too. Eventually, Jake's overpampering goes out of control. All that moisturizing and attention causes his butt to physically expand. It swells into a giant balloon that is big enough to block sunlight and casts a literal shadow over the school. He can barely walk. He slips, crashes into the courtyard, and face plants in front of teachers and students. Adam realizes the butt only grew because everyone kept looking at it. So the solution is simple. Everyone just ignores the butt. Without attention, it shrinks back to normal. Jake promises he's done with the obsession and immediately starts naming his elbows. Cartoon Network quietly pulled the episode soon after it was aired, calling it too vulgar for a TVY7 audience. Seeing how there are about a dozen butt jokes crammed into an 11-minute episode, they weren't wrong. Still, the episode aired normally overseas, and fans can find it on DVD. This proves once again that early 2000s cartoons tested boundaries that modern networks would never dare touch. Leapfrogs from Rocko's Modern Life. Most cartoons try to sneak one or two adult jokes past the censors, but the writers of Rocko's Modern Life decided to write an entire episode about a housewife trying to cheat on her husband. Rocko's Modern Life is a show about a socially anxious wallaby working retail and dealing with the stress of adulthood. But in Season 2, Episode 6, the writers took that stress to a weird place. In the episode titled Leapfrogs, Bev Bighead, Rocko's toad neighbor, is stuck in a loveless marriage with her grumpy husband, Ed. The opening scene sets the tone as Bev calls for Ed to come to bed while he's too busy waxing his lips and ignoring her. She flips through an old photo album, sighs about how their spark is gone, and even Cupid shows up to shoot love arrows at them, but gives up in frustration. That's the level of adult plot we're working with. The next morning, Ed leaves for work, and Bev spots Rocko outside raking leaves. The music playing sounds suspiciously like Mrs. Robinson, and if you don't know that reference, it's a not-so-subtle nod to The Graduate Show, which is literally about a housewife seducing a younger man. Bev walks outside and compliments Rocko's hard work, then lures him into her house by saying she'll pay him to fix things. From there, the innuendo ramps up disturbingly fast. Rocko tries fixing her VCR, only to discover that the tape inside it is a toad mating documentary. Pretty sure that's the cartoon equivalent of watching adult videos together. After that, Bev keeps coming up with excuses to keep Rocko inside. She pretends there's a spider in the bathroom so he'll come to protect her. From there, the suggestive imagery ramps up even more. Bev's red dress rips as she tumbles around, leaving Rocko frantically zipping his eyes shut in embarrassment while she flirts harder. She then asks him to rub her feet, which are so stinky that the smell launches him into the ceiling fan and shaves off his fur. After what feels like hours of harassment, Rocko makes a run for it. He grabs the door handle and tries to leave right as Ed Bighead walks inside. He walks in, sees Rocko disheveled and Bev half-dressed, and instantly assumes the worst. Ed explodes in rage. Rocko disintegrates from embarrassment, literally. Then Ed and Bev end the episode in a makeup scene where their tongues get stuck together in a sloppy kiss gag. It was supposed to be a happy ending, but it just feels like a really uncomfortable soap opera. After airing for the first time in 1993, Leapfrogs slipped under the radar for a few years, until networks realized just how adult it was. By 1997, it was banned from rotation in the US, Canada, and New Zealand. It didn't air again until Nicktoons revived it in 2002, and even then, most channels avoided it completely. Beauty and the Beach from Pokemon. This Pokemon episode speedran every possible reason to make censors sweat, and became one of the earliest and most infamous Pokemon bans ever. The episode starts on a harmless note. Ash, Misty, and Brock arrive at a beautiful sunny beach resort. But it is a Pokemon episode, so naturally something goes wrong within the first 5 minutes. Ash crashes a speedboat into a dock owned by an old man named Mo. To pay for the damages, the group ends up working in Mo's restaurant, which is losing business to a rival restaurant named Brutella. So far, it looks like a typical anime filler episode. Then, the writers decided to make things uncomfortable. It starts small. Misty walks out in a bikini, and Ash immediately makes a snarky comment about her looking like a real girl. Misty nails him with a beach ball. Brock starts blushing, and the show just goes on. At first, it sounds like harmless fun until you remember Misty is literally 10 years old. You absolutely can't get away with commenting on a child's body like that on television today. To raise money to pay off the boat damage, everyone enters a beach beauty contest. Gary Oak, who is Ash's arrogant rival, shows up with a squad of cheerleaders to mock them. Misty enters the contest herself and tries to win over the judges by posing alongside her water Pokemon. Team Rocket bursts in wearing goofy costumes. It is chaotic, but manageable. And then James, the male member of Team Rocket, walks out wearing a bikini with inflatable breasts. He strikes poses, shakes the breasts around, and literally squeezes a hand pump to make them bigger. Then he turns to Misty, a 10-year-old, and tells her she won't have a chest like his for another 10 years. In Japan, some people saw it as typical anime humor. Slapstick cross-dressing, exaggerated body jokes, nothing too serious. But in the US, the whole country was in the middle of a media storm regarding the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, a child beauty queen. The public was already debating the explicit exploitation of children, so a cartoon man mocking a 10-year-old girl's body was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. To make things worse, Mo's original Japanese line to Misty literally translates to, "I'll look forward to you in 8 years." 4Kids Entertainment, the company responsible for dubbing the show for Western audiences, changed it to something safer. But the original didn't help the episode's reputation. The rest of the contest doesn't get any better. There's more ogling, body shaming, and awkward comments that absolutely do not belong in a show aimed at 6-year-olds. After all that, Team Rocket fires a missile during the event. Ash orders his fire lizard Charmander to use a flamethrower attack to deflect it. Brutella's restaurant explodes, and Moe sails away to live his best retirement life. To avoid offending pretty much all of America, the US version was heavily cut, including nearly all the James content. Even then, it only aired once in 2000 before disappearing forever. It never returned to TV, it never appeared on DVD, and it's not on Netflix, Pokemon TV, or any official platform. Tier 4. One beer from Tiny Toon Adventures. This episode called Elephant Issues was meant to teach kids important lessons. And yeah, it technically does that, just in the most unhinged way possible. Tiny Toon Adventures was basically the junior league for the Looney Tunes. Produced by Steven Spielberg, it followed the next generation of cartoon stars attending Acme Looniversity. It was high budget, frantic, and usually pretty smart. But then came the segment One Beer. The segment opens with the show's main trio: Buster Bunny, Plucky Duck, and Hampton staring into a fridge. They find a beer and Buster decides they should drink it to show the evils of alcohol. Hampton panics, Plucky shrugs, and Buster pops the cap anyway. From there, everything spirals. The second they take a sip, the animation warps. Their faces stretch, the shadows twist, and horns sprout. It kinda turns into an LSD acid trip. They burp in harmony. They suddenly grow beards, and their breath is so toxic, it sends their female counterparts, Babs, Shirley, and Fifi, running for their lives. And then comes the moment where every 90s kid collectively blinked and asked, are they allowed to do this? Plucky spots a police car parked outside a donut shop, with the keys still inside it. And the trio decide to steal it. Underage drinking? Check. Driving stolen property? Double check. Doing it while plastered? Triple check. As they speed off, they pass a giant sign that literally says, now leaving reality, which is honestly the perfect description of everything happening at this point. Buster makes jokes about drunk driving. Plucky casually admits he doesn't even know how to drive, and instead of hitting the brakes, they aim the car up a giant peak actually labeled Death Mountain. They blast through a danger sign, launch off the cliff, and crash straight into a graveyard and explode. Their little cartoon souls float up into the sky. Then, in the most whiplash-inducing twist ever, the characters stand up in angel outfits, peel them off, and basically go, hope you kids learned something. Drinking is uncool. The segment tries to work like an anti-alcohol PSA, but the tone swings between slapstick comedy, dark satire, and straight-up vehicular death. Parents hated it. Fox pulled the episode from rotation after one airing. Other networks only aired it occasionally, making fans think it was banned entirely. Even decades later, people still debate whether the segment was brilliant, irresponsible, or both. Supernova from Buzz Lightyear. If you watch Toy Story, you probably know this one. Buzz Lightyear is about Buzz leading a team of misfit cops against the forces of evil. It is usually pretty standard hero stuff. But in Season 1, Episode 12, titled Supernova, the writers accidentally turned a space princess into a full-blown drug metaphor. On the surface, it looks like a normal Buzz Lightyear mission. Team Lightyear is trying to stop a medical ship from exploding. The reactor is unstable. So Mira Nova, the team's rookie ranger with the ability to walk through walls, ghosts inside to fix it. She saves the ship, but the energy surge hits her directly, soaking into her body like radioactive adrenaline. At first, this new power is cool. She can phase faster, hit harder, and blow through obstacles. But then you notice something's wrong. Mira starts getting hooked. She starts craving the energy high. She sneaks off to feed on more power sources. Her skin glows, her eyes sharpen, and her personality gets snappy, reckless, and obsessed. Her father, King Nova, warns her that he went through the same thing when he was younger. Too much exposure, and the high becomes dependency. Buzz tries to ground her from missions, but Mira ignores him. She phases into power conduits across the city like she's chasing a fix, which she is. And that's when Zurg steps in. Not as a villain with lasers, but as a literal dealer. He lures Mira with promises of unlimited energy hidden on an asteroid. She falls for it and ends up trapped, begging him for more power in a scene that feels way too raw for a Disney cartoon. Team Lightyear eventually rescues her, but the chaos is far from over, because Mira starts fighting through withdrawal. She shakes, stumbles, and loses her powers mid-fight. It's intense for a TVY7 show. Eventually, she chooses to stop feeding on the energy, defeats Zurg, and reunites with her team. Technically, the writers claimed this was a story about power management, but anyone with eyes could see it was a 22-minute allegory for substance abuse. And that is why things got messy behind the scenes. Disney aired it twice, and then it vanished. and no one can blame them. It's Breaking Bad for kids. Executives saw the metaphor immediately and yanked it from US rotations. Flying dupes from Tailspin. Disney usually censors things for being too scary or too gross, but this episode was banned for being a tutorial for domestic terrorism. This is Tailspin. The show took Baloo from the Jungle Book, put him in a bomber jacket, and made him a cargo pilot in a 1930s world. It is usually about pirates and wacky deliveries, but the writers decided to end the series with a bang, literally. The series finale, episode 65, titled Flying Dupes, begins when Baloo takes a gig from a shady client. He has to deliver a gift-wrap package to the leader of a cold, militaristic country called Thembria. Thembria is basically a cartoon parody of the Soviet Union where everyone is miserable and covered in snow. Baloo doesn't question the job. He just hops in his plane and goes. Meanwhile, we meet Colonel Spigot, a tiny, bossy officer who acts like he's important, but can't actually fly a plane. His dictator-like leader orders him to pilot an aircraft for a ceremony. Naturally, he panics, so Spigot secretly begs Baloo to teach him how to fly. Baloo agrees, thinking it's just another silly day on the job. But here's where everything turns on its head. While they're on the air, Baloo discovers that the gift in the back of his plane isn't a present. It is a bomb with a live timer meant to assassinate the High Marshal of Thembria. Baloo is not just a pilot anymore. He's an unwitting mule for an arms dealer trying to start World War III just to boost his quarterly sales. From here, the tone shifts fast. Baloo tries to get rid of the bomb. Spigot keeps messing up the controls. Thembrian soldiers chase them through the sky. And all the while, the timer keeps ticking. Eventually, in classic cartoon fashion, Spigot saves the day by pure accident. He fumbles so badly that he drops the bomb out of the plane, and it detonates harmlessly. The assassination plot is exposed, the bad guy is caught, and Baloo goes home thinking all's well that ends well. However, the executives at Disney were not laughing. The episode aired once in the US in 1991. The timing was catastrophic. It aired just weeks before the actual Soviet Union collapsed, and while the world was on edge about global conflict. Disney panicked. They didn't want a children's cartoon anywhere near themes of terrorism, assassination, or political conflict, so they trashed it immediately. After 9/11, it became even more untouchable. It stayed completely off American TV until a DVD release in 2013, and it's still not on Disney Plus today. And you know what? This isn't the only time Disney stirred up political tension between countries. They once managed to make Mickey Mouse offend an entire nation. We'll talk about that in Tier 5. Troubled Waters from Fireman Sam. This show was supposed to be putting out fires, but in 2016, the show accidentally started a massive political one for blasphemy. If you've never seen Fireman Sam, it's a British preschool show about firefighters in a small Welsh town. Every episode teaches basic safety messages. Don't play with matches, don't wander off alone, always call for help, that sort of thing. The tone is simple, cheerful, and designed for very young kids. In Season 9, Episode 7, titled Troubled Waters, the writers aimed for a standard rescue plot. The story focuses on Station Officer Steele and train conductor Gareth. They decided to take a day off and bring two local kids, Sarah and James, along for a boat ride. At first, it's harmless fun, but as soon as the two men started trying to outdo one another, their friendly competition spirals out of control. Because the adults are distracted by their egos, the engine fails, and the boat ends up floating helplessly toward the open sea. As always, Fireman Sam and his rescue team have to step in and fix the situation. Up to this point, the episode is completely ordinary, the kind of thing you'd expect from a kids' show. But then comes the moment that sparked the international outrage. Roughly 2 minutes in, there's a blink and you miss it gag where Elvis, a clumsy firefighter, slips on loose sheets of paper and falls. The entire shot flashes by in less than a second, and most viewers never noticed anything at all. However, if you hit pause at just the right time, you'll notice that one of the papers Elvis slips on contains real Arabic text, specifically verses from Surah Al-Mulk, a chapter of the Quran. Because the text is upside down and mirrored, it looks like the animation team simply grabbed a random image file to use as a prop without realizing what it contained. You're probably wondering what the big deal is. Well, the issue wasn't the text itself. It was how it appeared. In the scene, the page flies up into the air, and Elvis steps directly on it. Even if it was completely accidental, the resulting image shows a firefighter, who is the moral hero of the show, stepping on pages from the Quran, which is unacceptable. Once a member of the Muslim Council of Britain posted a screenshot on Twitter, the scene went viral within hours. News sites picked it up immediately. Parents were confused, angry, and demanding an explanation. The backlash forced the UK broadcaster and the studio behind Fireman Sam to make an official statement. They apologized, said the text was never meant to appear on screen, and ultimately blamed the third-party animation studio in China that created the CGI scene. They also cut ties with that studio and removed the episode from all UK streaming platforms within 24 hours. Today, Troubled Waters still exists, but only in corrected form. The original unedited version hasn't been broadcast since 2016. Flight as a Feather from The Mask. This is one of those kid show episodes you watch as an adult and go, hold on, this aired for kids? The episode is called Flight as a Feather, and it aired in 1996 during Season 2 of The Mask, the animated series. The show was a spin-off of the Jim Carrey movie. It followed Stanley Ipkiss, a boring, nice guy who finds a magical Norse mask that turns him into a green-faced, reality-bending chaos god. The episode begins with the mask practicing for a Swedish karaoke contest. He sings horribly, shapeshifts into various costumes, and blasts the music so loud the landlady starts yelling. Instead of apologizing, he ties her to a chair and forces her to listen to his mixtape. So right from the start, it's kinda disturbing. Soon after, the plot shifts to a lucky feather in his fedora. It blows out the window, and he bolts after it like his life depends on it. The feather lands on a pizza at a local pizzeria. The mask cuts the line and scares off the customer who ordered the pizza by literally unzipping his own chest cavity to show off his internal organs. It works. But just as he grabs the pizza, a skateboarder crashes into him and sends the feather flying again. The chase leads him to a public ceremony where Mayor Tilton is signing a business deal. Everything seems normal until the mayor's furious ex-girlfriend, Cookie Baboom, storms in wearing a trench coat. She throws it open and reveals she's strapped with dynamite in the shape of a bikini. She declares that no one dumps her and gets away with it, clearly ready to blow herself up and take the mayor with her. Now you'd think the mask would try to save everyone, but nope, he only cares about grabbing his feather, which the mayor is now holding. So he jumps in, puts a mousetrap on the detonator, shapeshifts into a bartender, and mixes Cookie's dynamite bikini into a cocktail that he gulps down. Cookie spins around, fully exposed from the back, which leaves the cop staring at her in shock while the mask slips away. From that point forward, the episode just keeps getting stranger. The feather drifts into a pillow factory, sticks to a bird, gets swallowed by a whale, and eventually ends up in an eagle's nest. Meanwhile, everyone the mask annoyed along the way bands together into an angry mob. When they corner him, the mask only escapes by distracting them with s'mores and catapulting himself off a windmill straight to his karaoke contest. Because apparently that's still his priority. By the end, the reason this episode was banned becomes pretty obvious. A children's cartoon suddenly included a stripper wearing explosives, a self-destruction attempt, an implied wardrobe malfunction, and plenty of violent slapstick. Networks realized quickly that this went far beyond what TVY7 was supposed to allow. While the episode itself still circulates, the character of Cookie Baboom was effectively blacklisted. Tier 5. The Barnyard Battle from Mickey Mouse. People usually associate Mickey Mouse with theme parks and copyright lawsuits. But in 1930, he managed to get himself banned by an entire nation for insulting their dignity. The episode is called The Barnyard Battle, and it's one of the earliest Mickey Mouse cartoons ever made. The shot starts with a barnyard alarm ringing as all the mice prepare to defend their home from an invading army of cats led by Peg-Leg Pete. The cats wear spiked helmets that look almost exactly like the German Pickelhaube from World War I, which already gives the whole thing a specific political flavor. Mickey rushes to enlist, only to get pushed around by the examiners. They stretch him, poke him, toss him around, and even weigh him with an anvil while he's standing there in his underwear. Once Mickey is accepted, the fighting begins. The short plays out like a chaotic mini-war movie with cannons, collapsing trenches, explosions, and mice and cats flying across the screen. Eventually the mice win, and they celebrate to the Battle Cry of Freedom, a Union anthem from the American Civil War. This is where the trouble really started. In 1930, Germany banned the Barnyard Battle. The government argued that showing German-coded rats getting defeated by tiny mice insulted national dignity. This was during the Weimar Republic, years before the Nazi era, and officials were already sensitive about anything portraying Germany as weak. After the ban, the relationship between Germany and Mickey only got stranger. In the following years, Nazi officials began publicly attacking Mickey as vermin. Yet Adolf reportedly owned Mickey films privately. German newspapers criticized the cartoons as degenerate, and the government kept a close eye on American animation from that point on. The ban on the barnyard battle ended up being the first sign that Mickey could cause political tension overseas. Outside Germany, the short still made people uncomfortable. Later releases often cut the physical exam sequence because it looked like Mickey was being bullied for comedy. Modern audiences also notice how casually the short treats war, which is why some streaming platforms trim scenes or add disclaimers today. Comedians from Beavis and Butthead. This episode didn't just get banned. It got re-edited, censored, blamed for a child's death, dragged into Congress, and turned into a prime example of the media is corrupting our youth in the 90s. Beavis and Butthead was one of the most controversial cartoons of the 1990s. It aired on MTV and followed two teenage boys who sat on a couch, watched music videos, broke things, blew things up, laughed at everything, and basically did every irresponsible thing you would not want an actual teenager doing. Adults hated it. Teens loved it, and MTV leaned into the chaos. The episode Comedians aired in 1993, and at first it looked like typical Beavis and Butthead nonsense. The boys see a stand-up comedian on TV bragging about making money, and in their usual two-brain cell logic, they decided they want to do the same thing. They head to a comedy club called The Laugh Hole. Butthead goes on stage first. He bombs immediately. The crowd hates every second of it. Then Beavis tries. He freezes, looks around the stage for something funny to do, and notices a stack of newspapers. That is when everything falls apart. Beavis pulls out his lighter and sets the newspapers on fire while chanting, "Fire! Fire!" The flames spread fast. The whole club goes up in seconds, and Beavis and Butthead laugh like it is part of the performance. It lasts about 30 seconds, but it's one of the most dangerous scenes the show had ever aired. At first, MTV treated it like slapstick. Viewers shrugged it off as Beavis being Beavis. Then, everything changed. About 1 month later, in October 1993, a tragic fire happened in Moraine, Ohio. A 5-year-old boy accidentally set his family's trailer on fire with a cigarette lighter. His 2-year-old sister didn't survive. In the chaos that followed, the mother claimed the boy was obsessed with Beavis and Butthead and had been copying the fire starter behavior. That was all the media needed. Overnight, the narrative was locked in. Headlines blamed MTV. Talk shows blamed cartoons, and Beavis and Butthead became the face of TV is destroying our kids. MTV did not wait for the facts. They went into full damage control mode. They yanked comedians off the air immediately and banned it permanently. They also went through the entire series and scrubbed out every fire reference they could find. Beavis's iconic "Fire, Fire" chant was muted or dubbed over. Reruns were pushed to the 11 p.m. death slot, and MTV slapped a now famous disclaimer before every broadcast. Beavis and Butthead are not role models. Don't try this at home. But here's the cynical twist. When reporters actually did their jobs later on, neighbors revealed that the family in Ohio didn't even have cable television. It was physically impossible for the kid to have watched the show. Years later, the boy himself confirmed in an interview that he had never seen Beavis and Butthead and did not even know who they were. The entire controversy was based on a lie, but it reshaped the network forever. Tier 1. To Kill a Mockingbird. At first glance, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird seems like a cozy story about small-town life. Warm summer nights, noisy neighbors, and kids getting into just the right amount of trouble. You know, the usual. But it doesn't take long for the reader to realize it's actually about racism, injustice, and the kind of moral hypocrisy that makes you want to throw the whole town in the trash. Throw in some spicy language and you've got a novel that's been getting banned for decades. Published in 1960, the novel follows Scout Finch, a feisty little girl growing up in Macomb, Alabama, during the Great Depression. Her father, Atticus Finch, is a lawyer, and more importantly, the town's designated moral compass. But when he decides to defend Tom Robinson, a black man falsely accused of assaulting a white woman, things take a sharp turn. The trial is a slow, painful march towards inevitable justice. And soon, the town turns on Atticus and his family for daring to challenge the status quo. Through Scout's innocent eyes, we watch as she slowly realizes just how rigged the system is. And then there's Boo Radley, the neighbor's favorite urban legend. Everyone thinks he's a deranged recluse, but by the end, he's revealed to be a tragic, misunderstood hero. Between Boo Radley, systemic racism, and main charactering your way through childhood trauma, this book hits like a warm hug followed by a slap from reality. The novel tackles racism, classism, gender roles, and the blurred line between justice and revenge. So, why the bans? Well, first off, racial slurs. Lots of them. Schools aren't always thrilled about making kids read those out loud. Then there's the argument that the book's portrayal of race is outdated, with Atticus playing the white savior while black characters like Tom Robinson remain largely passive. Some parents also take issue with its depictions of assault, domestic violence, and the overall bleakness of the story. Ask 10 people about Mockingbird and you'll get 12 opinions. Half think it's essential reading. The other half thinks it's just white savior fanfiction with extra steps. Either way, it's still getting pulled off shelves. 1984. George Orwell's 1984 is what happens when the government gets really into gaslighting and your Alexa starts snitching. Paranoia isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. The story follows Winston Smith, a guy just trying to quietly survive under a regime where independent thought is basically a crime. Unfortunately, Winston's got a rebellious streak, and in a world where Big Brother is always watching, that's a problem. Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, aka Fox News if it had state funding and a body count. Truth isn't real. It's just a vibe approved by the government and sponsored by fear. If they say history changed, then history changed. If they say 2 + 2 = 5, well, better nod and smile, or else. Surveillance is non-stop. There are telescreens, microphones, and thought police all waiting to catch you even thinking the wrong thing. And if you so much as look like you're questioning authority, you vanish forever. The lucky ones just get erased from history, but the unlucky ones get dragged to the Ministry of Love, where re-education means endless torture and a complete mental breakdown. Despite the very scary consequences, Winston dares to question it all. He starts writing a diary, which is forbidden, falls in love, also forbidden, and joins a secret rebellion, which, yep, you guessed it, is very forbidden. Plot twist, the whole rebellion was government-run. Winston gets arrested, brainwashed, and turned into a bootlicker so hard he'd swipe right on fascism. 1984 has been banned and challenged repeatedly for being too political, too sexual, and too controversial, which is honestly the most Orwellian response possible. The scariest part? 1984 stopped being a dystopia and quietly turned into a user manual. And if you want to know how far we've slipped, just look at who's rewriting the news. The Catcher in the Rye. Since its 1951 release, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger has been a magnet for controversy, a rite of passage for angsty teens, and for some inexplicable reason, the book of choice for a few real-life assassins. We'll get to that later. The novel follows Holden Caulfield, a disoriented rich kid who spends 3 days wandering through New York City after getting expelled from yet another fancy prep school. Over the course of his adventure, he picks fights, hires a prostitute he doesn't sleep with, gets wasted, offends almost everyone he meets, and slowly unravels into existential despair. The one person who sees through his nonsense is his little sister, Phoebe, who immediately calls him out on his aimless rebellion. Through it all, Holden is obsessed with saving children from the lies of adulthood. His grand fantasy is to be the catcher in the rye, stopping kids before they metaphorically or literally fall off the edge. The book comes with all the ingredients for a good moral panic. Profanity, references to sex and prostitution, underage drinking, and a protagonist who critiques everything from religion to the educational system and the military. Naturally, schools and parents lost their minds. But what really got The Catcher in the Rye banned wasn't just its content. It was its connection to real-world violence. The most infamous case? Mark David Chapman, the guy who shot John Lennon, was arrested with a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in his possession. He claimed the book was his personal manifesto. Then there was John Hinckley Jr., who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan and also had a connection with the novel. After these incidents, schools and libraries started treating The Catcher in the Rye like a dangerous virus. It ended up being banned in multiple states in the 20th century. For a book about teen angst and disillusionment, it sure managed to scare the hell out of a lot of adults. Fahrenheit 451. In this book, Guy Montag's job is basically arson, but make it government approved. He burns books because thinking too hard is basically terrorism now. Books make people think, and thinking leads to questions. And questions, well, they just make life complicated. And we can't have that, can we? But then Montag meets Clarice, a young girl who actually enjoys things like walking, talking, and worst of all, thinking. She opens his eyes to a world, and suddenly, burning books doesn't feel so heroic. A woman literally lights herself on fire rather than live in a world without books, and Montag starts glitching. So he steals a book, then another, and another. Before long, he's got a whole forbidden stash hidden in his vent, and his wife, Mildred, is about 2 seconds away from snitching on him because her television family is way more important than a pile of dusty old words. Montag turns to an ex-professor, Faber, who lays it all out for him. Society didn't just wake up one day and decided to ban books. People chose ignorance. They traded knowledge for entertainment, and the government just followed along. Things go nuclear when Montag's boss, Captain Beatty, gives him a test. Burn the books or burn his own life down. Montag fails spectacularly by turning the flamethrower on Beatty himself. He's on the run from a robo-spider dog with a nose for nerds. Literally exists to murder people who read. With nowhere left to run, he escapes to a group of exiled intellectuals who have dedicated their lives to preserving books. Not on paper, but in their minds. They become living libraries, with each person memorizing a book until the world is ready to read again. Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451 as a warning, inspired by Nazi book burnings, Soviet censorship, and the creeping influence of mindless entertainment. Ironically, the book about censorship has been censored. Schools have banned it, edited it, and even released clean versions with all the bad words scrubbed out. Brave New World. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, written in 1931 and published in 1932, tells the story of a future where humans are engineered, conditioned, and drugged into submission, all in the name of social stability. In this world, babies are created in factories, not born. They're then sorted into castes before taking their first breath. The goal? To keep everyone perfectly happy with their place in society and make sure there's no rebellion or dissatisfaction. There's no deep thought, no questioning of the system, just mindless consumption. And for good measure, a government-distributed drug called Soma that keeps everyone calm and blissfully ignorant. Enter Bernard Marx, our main guy. He's a psychologist, but he's not vibing with this setup. He's shorter than the ideal, which is basically a social death sentence in this world, and he's deeply uncomfortable with the fact that society is built on mindless pleasure. Bernard and his sort of girlfriend, Lenina, venture to a savage reservation, a place where people live in a more natural way, getting old, feeling emotions, experiencing actual life, all the good stuff. It's here that they meet John, a young man born of the world state, but raised among the so-called savages. John's obsession with Shakespeare makes him stand out, because he actually feels something, which is a dangerous trait to have in a world built to avoid discomfort at all costs. When John arrives in London, he becomes a celebrity. Meanwhile, his mother Linda overdoses on Soma. John, horrified by this artificial world, tries to introduce concepts like love, grief, and human connection, but is met with laughter and confusion. Eventually, he retreats into self-imposed exile, though society's prying eyes never leave him. The book ends on a bleak note with John's tragic death. So, why was Brave New World banned? Let's break it down. Graphic depictions of sex, a blatant rejection of religion, and a sharp critique of mindless consumerism. Yep, that sounds about right. These elements sparked outrage in schools, religious groups, and entire countries. Ironically, censoring Huxley's work only proves his point. The Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood, who basically wrote a dystopia and then watched it come true in real life, dropped us into Gilead, a Bible-flavored dictatorship where women's rights get nuked and the patriarchy gets a glow-up. Offred is a handmaid, aka a state-certified womb with legs. Thanks to a fertility crisis caused by pollution and radiation, the government's solution? Draft the fertile women, dress them like giant red flags, and force them to participate in the ceremony. A ritual that's basically weaponized scripture and legally mandated trauma. But it's fine because, it's in the Bible. Offred wasn't always livestock. She once had a job, a husband, and a daughter. But after the sons of Jacob staged a coup, killed democracy, and turned America into Gilead, women lost their rights overnight. They had no jobs, no money, and no way to escape. When Offred and her family tried to run, her husband was shot. Her daughter was captured, and Offred got sentenced to reproductive servitude. Now she's trapped in a world where wives wear blue. Marthas, the domestic help, wear green. And handmaids wear bright red. Yeah, that's very subtle. Meanwhile, the Eyes, aka Gilead's secret police, lurk everywhere, ready to make anyone disappear for even thinking the wrong thing. The commander, Offred's assigned creepy old man, tries to spice things up by sneaking her into illegal Scrabble matches, which in Gilead is basically softcore rebellion. His wife, Serena Joy, used to preach about a woman's place on TV, and now gets to live her own cautionary tale in real time. To spice things up, Offred gets roped into an underground resistance called Mayday, and starts a secret affair with the commander's driver, Nick. The novel wraps up with Offred being taken away by men who could be rescuers or the secret police. It's hard to say, since in Gilead, hope and doom look pretty much the same. 200 years later, a panel of smug male historians debate whether Offred's story is reliable. Because even in the future, men still find ways to doubt women's experiences. Unsurprisingly, The Handmaid's Tale has been banned in schools for depictions of assault, misogyny, and religious extremism. So basically, things that actually happen in real life. Tier 2. Lolita. On the surface, Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel Lolita might seem like a tragic confession of a man obsessed. But beneath that, it is a poetic nightmare, deceptively wrapped in a pastel-colored cover, something Nabokov was vehemently against. The story is told through the eyes of Humbert Humbert, a French literature professor who becomes fixated on a 12-year-old Dolores Hayes, whom he renames Lolita. Through manipulation, deception, and straight-up kidnapping, he manipulates her, marries her mom, kidnaps her, and abuses her, all while acting like it's some grand romance. He then takes her on a cross-country kidnapping tour, sponsored by gaslighting and trauma. Humbert dresses up his crimes with fancy metaphors and flowery language as a way to convince the reader to buy into his delusion. And this is what makes Lolita so controversial. It focuses readers to look inside the mind of a predator without sugarcoating the damage and destruction he leaves in his wake. It's pretty uncomfortable. He keeps calling her Lolita to control the narrative, to keep his sick fantasy alive. But the girl he ruined was real. She was coerced, trapped, and discarded by a man who only values her as an object of desire. Her real story is buried under Humbert's endless whining, but Nabokov makes sure we can't ignore it. When the novel was first published, the world wasn't ready. Censors practically had a meltdown. Too cursed for US and UK publishers. France was like, we've seen worse. It didn't take too long for Lolita to be banned in the UK and France, who both denounced it as obscene and immoral. But despite all the backlash, and even praise from Graham Greene, who called it one of the best books of the year, outrage stayed strong. There's no love here, just obsession, trauma, and a story that forces you to sit in the mind of a predator and refuses to let you look away. American Psycho. This is by far the most unhinged Bret Easton Ellis, and it can be considered a litmus test for how much psychological horror a person can stomach before their soul starts glitching. Published in 1991, the novel introduces Patrick Bateman, a Wall Street golden boy by day and a violent, unhinged serial killer by night. He's got a skincare routine that could rival a Kardashian's, a designer wardrobe, and a hobby that involves dismemberment. You know, just the usual finance bro lifestyle. The story follows Bateman's descent into madness. He lives in a world obsessed with appearances, where no one listens to anyone else. So when Bateman casually confesses to murder over dinner, his friends brush it off as some edgy joke. Now, let's talk about those murders. American Psycho doesn't hold back on the graphic details. We're talking torture, cannibalism, and violent acts so grotesque that even Ellis admitted he might have gone a bit too far. But here's the twist. Are these murders real? Or is Bateman just a delusional man spiraling into madness? The novel keeps you guessing. It does so by trapping readers into Bateman's unreliable mind, where reality and hallucination blur together like a bad acid trip. The book's graphic violence got it banned or heavily restricted in several countries. In Germany, you had to be 18 to buy it. In some parts of Australia, where it wasn't outrightly banned, it was sold shrink-wrapped like some cursed artifact. By the end of the book, there's no resolution. The murders may or may not have actually happened, but Bateman remains at large, and the novel closes with one final ominous line. This is not an exit. The Satanic Verses. Salman Rushdie's 1988 novel, The Satanic Verses, is the kind of book that lands a worldwide bounty on your head. And that's exactly what happened to Rushdie. Combining magical realism, historical fiction, and seriously provocative religious themes, the novel pushes boundaries in ways most authors wouldn't dare. It also includes a controversial retelling of a disputed Islamic tale about 3 pagan goddesses. But what really set the world on fire was Rushdie's fictionalized portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad's life, which some readers, by some I mean entire governments and extremist groups, saw as blasphemous. And that's why all hell broke loose. As punishment for his blasphemy, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a fatwa calling for Rushdie's death. As you might imagine, the Satanic Verses didn't just make headlines. It sparked riots, violence, and widespread international outrage. The plot itself is a wild ride, featuring 2 Indian actors, Gabriel Farishta and Saladin Chamcha, who survive a plane crash, only to fall to Earth and realize they've magically transformed into angelic and demonic versions of themselves. Then there's Mahund, a prophet who briefly allows the worship of 3 goddesses, only to later denounce them as the work of Satan. There's also this bizarre dream sequence where a girl convinces an entire village to walk into the sea, promising them a miraculous crossing to Mecca. Spoiler alert, it didn't go the way the villagers hoped it would. In addition to the fatwa, an Iranian foundation placed a $3 million bounty on Rushdie's head. Bookstores were bombed for selling the book, and translators and publishers were targeted. One of them, Hitoshi Igarashi, was stabbed to death. Rushdie himself spent years in hiding under police protection. Even after years passed, the controversy didn't die down. In 2022, an attacker tried to finish the job by stabbing Rushdie multiple times during a public event. Thankfully, he survived. The Perks of Being a Wallflower. If you were a teenager in the early 2000s, you either read The Perks of Being a Wallflower or knew someone who wouldn't shut up about it. Written by Stephen Chbosky in 1999, this novel follows Charlie, a painfully shy high school freshman who overthinks everything, has deep-seated trauma, and copes by writing letters to an unknown recipient. Naturally, any book that speaks too honestly about teenage life is doomed to get banned, and this one was no different. The Perks of Being a Wallflower has been repeatedly challenged in schools for its depictions of sex, drugs, mental health struggles, and abuse. Parents read the book and collectively went, nope. As if their own teenagers weren't going through these exact same things. At its core, the story is about Charlie trying to make sense of the world. He befriends 2 seniors, Patrick and Sam, who introduce him to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, mixtapes, and the art of actually living. Meanwhile, flashbacks of his Aunt Helen, a woman he once idolized, start surfacing, revealing that his childhood wasn't as innocent as he thought. After a mental breakdown, Charlie is hospitalized and finally faces the truth of his past. The novel gained a cult following, and when the 2012 film adaptation starring Logan Lerman, Emma Watson, and Ezra Miller hit the theaters, the controversy exploded all over again. Ulysses. James Joyce's Ulysses is the kind of book people name drop to sound smart, even though they've only made it through 5 confusing pages. It's a literary labyrinth, and apparently a threat to public decency. Or at least that's what nearly every authority figure in the early 20th century thought. Published in 1922, Ulysses follows one day in the life of Leopold Bloom, a regular guy wandering through Dublin, thinking deeply about everything from bodily functions to classical mythology, and, of course, sex. It's part epic, part inner monologue, and entirely too real for early censors. The scandal started before the book was even published. From 1918 to 1920, excerpts ran in The Little Review, and one chapter, Nausicaa, featured Bloom getting a bit too into watching a woman on the beach. The US government was not amused. Officials labeled it obscene, banned it outright, and even burned copies. In 1921, a New York court officially ruled that Americans couldn't handle it. The UK wasn't far behind in its outrage, and Ireland, Joyce's own homeland, basically disowned him. Irish authorities considered Ulysses an insult to Dublin and banned it until the 1960s, just to be safe. Things changed in 1933, when Judge John M. Woolsey declared that Ulysses was not pornographic. He admitted it was a slog to read, but not likely to corrupt anyone's soul. With that, the book was finally legalized in the US. Joyce, ever the literary troll, once said he packed the book with enough puzzles to keep academics busy for centuries. Mission very much accomplished. Ulysses went from being banned and burned to being called one of the greatest novels ever written. The book was designed to confuse readers for over 100 years, and clearly, the author loved every minute of it. The Bluest Eye. Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye follows Pecola Breedlove, a young black girl growing up in 1940s Ohio, who desperately wishes for blue eyes. Why? Because society has made it painfully clear that beauty equals whiteness, and that she, as she is, will never be good enough. The novel is mostly narrated by Claudia McTeer, a sharp and observant girl who, along with her sister Frida, is one of the only people who actually care about Pecola. And trust me, Pecola needs someone in her corner because her life is a non-stop horror show. Her father, Shali, is an abusive alcoholic with a tragic backstory that might almost make you feel sorry for him, until he takes advantage of his own daughter. When Pecola ends up pregnant, the entire community doesn't support her. They blame her. Instead of seeing her as a victim, they turn her into a scapegoat, as if her suffering is something shameful rather than something they should stop. The only people who care about her baby's survival are Claudia and Frida, who plant marigold seeds in a desperate attempt at some kind of sympathetic magic. The flowers never bloom. The baby doesn't survive. All of this leaves Piccola completely shattered, to the point that she retreats into madness, convinced that she finally has the blue eyes she always dreamed of. In this book, Morrison doesn't hold back, just provides a raw, brutal look at racism, self-hatred, and the way society destroys its most vulnerable people while pretending not to see. Naturally, this made a lot of people uncomfortable. The book has been banned and challenged in schools across America for its graphic depictions of violence, child abuse, and incest. But it's not just the content that unsettles people, it's the way the novel refuses to look away. 50 Shades Trilogy. 50 Shades of Grey was more than just a book. It was a full-blown cultural event. A scandal, if you will. Suddenly, your aunt, your teacher, and maybe even your neighbor's sweet old grandma were all reading the same smutty novel and insisting it was just a love story. E.L. James' 50 Shades Trilogy, 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades Darker, and 50 Shades Freed first appeared on the scene in 2011, pulling mainstream audiences into the world of BDSM and billionaire romance while serving up more inner goddess monologues than anyone ever asked for. The story follows Anastasia Steele, a college student who stumbles, literally, by the way, into the orbit of Christian Grey. Christian is a young, brooding billionaire with a passion for control, both in the boardroom and the bedroom. What starts as a slightly awkward interview quickly turns into a high-stakes romance filled with contracts, safe words, and a lot of red flags. Christian, whose tragic backstory includes a disturbing relationship with an older dominatrix, introduces Anna to his very particular tastes. The series follows their push and pull dynamic as Anna struggles with the unique terms of their relationship. The books were a phenomenon. They sold over 150 million copies worldwide, spawned 3 movies, and made E.L. James one of the highest paid authors ever. But with great success came great controversy, and 50 Shades practically drowned in it. The BDSM community accused the books of misrepresenting their lifestyle, arguing that Christian's behavior was more about control and abuse than actual consensual kink. Feminists were divided. Some saw it as empowering, others as deeply problematic. Meanwhile, domestic abuse advocates pointed out that Christian's manipulative tactics seemed more predatory than passionate. And of course, Malaysia wasn't having it. The Malaysian government banned 50 Shades under its strict censorship laws regarding sexually explicit content. Bookstores weren't allowed to sell it, and local publishers couldn't distribute it. Authorities cited moral values as the reason for the ban. But as history has shown, banning a book only makes people want it more. Readers just found other ways to get their hands on it. If there's one surefire way to boost book sales, it's to tell people they shouldn't read it. Tier 3. The Naked and the Dead. Norman Mailer was just 25 when he published The Naked and the Dead in 1948, and let's just say he made one hell of an entrance. Inspired by his own experience, including his time working as a cook during the Pacific Campaign of World War II, the book doesn't sugarcoat the horrors of war. It's a 721-page brick of suffering, showing all the grime, sweat, and sheer brutality of battle. The story follows an American platoon navigating enemy fire and the effects of the war on their humanity. Set on the fictional island of Anapolpe, the novel tracks a ragtag group of soldiers struggling through a brutal campaign to oust the Japanese. But don't expect some grand, noble war story. This is war stripped down to its bare bones. Exhaustion, fear, and loneliness. The soldiers aren't heroes, they're just men trying to survive, barely holding on to their sanity as they march through jungle rot, oppressive heat, and the constant possibility of a bullet ending them in an instant. In the book, Mailer dives into the psychological toll of war. The soldiers are dehumanized, treated like disposable tools by the higher-ups, and they know it. Orders come down with no regard for their lives. Carry this, march there, kill them. While the commanding officers live in relative comfort, the grunts sleep in mud and carry impossible loads. A key character in the book is Sam Croft, a sadistic sergeant with a ruthless leadership style. One soldier, Roth, finds a baby bird on the march and clings to it because it's pure and untouched by war. But Croft crushes it with his bare hands. That's the kind of story this is. As you would expect, death is a constant in Mailer's story. The soldiers drop like flies, often in ways that feel senseless. When Lieutenant Hearn is killed, the platoon barely has time to process it before they're shoved forward again. But when Roth dies, it shakes the entire unit. Unsurprisingly, the book didn't sit well with everyone. Censorship boards had a field day with Mailer's unfiltered take on war, especially his use of language. He wanted to drop as many F-bombs as he possibly could, but publishers made him replace the F word with fug. Still, the book was reportedly banned in some countries like Canada and Australia for being too obscene and too grim. But none of that stopped it from becoming a classic. The Modern Library ranked it among the top 100 English language novels of the 20th century, and Mailer himself considered it his most famous work. Another Country. In 1962, James Baldwin released Another Country, a novel that made people squirm in their seats. Set in Greenwich Village, Harlem, and France, the book dives right into the uncomfortable stuff. Racism, sexual identity, and the messy, often painful realities of human relationships. The story centers around Rufus Scott, a gifted jazz drummer whose life is rapidly falling apart. He soon becomes entangled in a messy relationship with Leona, a white woman from the South. As the book progresses, what started out as a reckless passion quickly spirals into something much darker, as Rufus, who is crushed under the weight of racism and self-loathing, becomes abusive. The relationship ends tragically, with Leona ending up in a mental institution and Rufus jumping to his death from the George Washington Bridge. But Rufus's death isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the fallout. His best friend, Vivaldo, a struggling writer, starts dating Rufus's sister, Ida, though she's skeptical of his true intentions. Meanwhile, Eric, Rufus's first male lover, returns from France with his new partner, Eve. But instead of closure, his return only deepens the emotional chaos. As the story unfolds, nearly every character becomes entangled in betrayal, self-discovery, and confusion. Eric sleeps with Cass, the wife of Rufus's friend, Richard. Vivaldo, still wrestling with his own identity crisis, ends up in bed with Eric. In the book, Baldwin forces readers to face the ways racism, homophobia, and societal pressures can twist love and connection. As you'd expect, the book faced serious backlash. Another Country was banned in New Orleans for its depictions of obscenity and LGBTQ themes. But by then, Baldwin's message had already spread far and wide. Born a Crime. Trevor Noah's Born a Crime isn't your typical banned book. It doesn't rely on explicit violence, sex, or any bizarre controversial topic that school boards in the US tend to freak out about. No, this book got banned because it dared to tell the story of what it was like growing up as a mixed-race child during apartheid. A kid who was literally born a crime. Trevor was born to a black Xhosa mother and a white Swiss-German father, which in apartheid-era South Africa was illegal. That meant Noah's mother had to go into stealth mode just to walk down the street with him. If the cops showed up, she had to pretend he wasn't her son or face arrest. Noah grew up in a world that had no idea what to do with him. He wasn't black enough for the black community, and he wasn't white enough for the white community. Essentially, it was illegal to exist in the in-between. But his mother, Patricia Nombuyiselo, was a force of nature. She taught Trevor to be quick-witted and adaptable. He learned to blend in, survive, and hustle, bootlegging CDs in Johannesburg's chaotic streets. And he talked his way out of trouble, like the time he was arrested for driving an unregistered car. Then there's the unforgettable part, where his stepfather, Abel, a violent and controlling man, shot Patricia in the head, and she survived. A gunshot wound to the skull. I mean, you have to admit, that's pretty badass. While the book makes it very clear that Trevor Noah is a talented comedian, it doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of racism, domestic abuse, and systemic oppression. Despite the censorship, Born a Crime has become a bestseller, loved worldwide, and even became required reading in some schools, including a class taught by none other than First Lady Jill Biden. So why was it banned? Apparently, the book's racial themes and some of Noah's views made people uncomfortable to the point it sparked some serious controversy. The House of the Spirits. Some books get banned for a few curse words or an ill-timed sex scene, but that's not what happened here. Isabel Allen's 1982 novel The House of the Spirits got banned because it refused to look away. The novel isn't just a family drama with some floating furniture and psychic whispers. It's a slow-burning generational tragedy that drags readers through Chile's political nightmares, class struggles, and enough personal vendettas to fuel a soap opera. It all starts with Clara, a quiet girl with eerie psychic abilities, and her sister, Rosa the Beautiful, who is exactly what her name suggests. Unfortunately, Rosa is too beautiful for her own good, and winds up poisoned in an assassination attempt meant for her father. Just kidding. Rosa's death actually had nothing to do with her beauty. It was more political. Anyway, enter Esteban Trueba, Rosa's heartbroken fiancé, who decides to channel his grief into becoming the worst possible version of himself. He retreats to his crumbling hacienda, works obsessively to rebuild his wealth, and, in his spare time, assaults local peasant women. Because why process your emotions when you can traumatize entire generations instead? Among the many illegitimate children he leaves behind is Esteban Garcia, a boy who will spend his life waiting for a chance to return the favor. But the House of the Spirits isn't just about one man's personal cruelty. It's about an entire country rotting from the inside out. Esteban Trueba climbs the social ladder and becomes a senator for the Conservative Party, while his own family fractures under his unchecked violence. His wife, Clara, refuses to speak to him for years after he knocks out her teeth in a fit of rage. Meanwhile, their daughter, Blanca, falls in love with a revolutionary named Pedro Tercero, and Esteban Trueba takes it about as well as you'd expect. He beats Blanca bloody, hunts Pedro down, and has him mutilated. Yet somehow neither of them die, because love is persistent, and so is political rebellion. As Chile inches toward military rule, things go from bad to hellish. Esteban Trueba cheers on the coup, convinced it'll protect his privileged way of life, only to realize that military dictatorships don't take kindly to old men with opinions. His son, Jaime, a doctor and socialist, dies in the chaos of the new regime. His granddaughter, Alba, is captured. And guess who's in charge of her torture? That's right, Esteban Garcia, the forgotten bastard with a personal vendetta, a military badge, and way too much enthusiasm for revenge. What follows is one of the novel's most horrifying sequences. Garcia assaults and tortures Alba, and by doing so, he repays the sins of a grandfather he never met. But instead of continuing the cycle of bloodshed, Alba does the one thing nobody expects. She refuses revenge. Unlike her grandfather, she chooses not to let violence consume her. By the end, she's pregnant, maybe by her lover, maybe by her attacker. But the novel doesn't dwell on it, because in the grand scheme of things, her survival and her refusal to pass on hatred are the only things that truly matter. Naturally, censors lost their minds. The book was challenged and banned in schools, mostly in the US, with parents clutching their pearls over the torture, assault, and anti-fascist themes. It was also banned in Chile because, Lady Chatterley's Lover. Lady Chatterley's Lover was more than just a novel. It was a grenade, tossed right into the lap of 20th century prudishness. When D.H. Lawrence published it privately in 1928, he might as well have set it on fire himself, because governments across the world immediately rushed to do just that. The plot follows Constance, a young aristocrat trapped in a passionless marriage to Sir Clifford Chatterley, a war-wounded man paralyzed from the waist down. Enter Oliver Mellors, the earthy, rugged gamekeeper who works on the Chatterley estate. Somewhere along the lines, the two began an affair that's raw, honest, and downright unrestrained. In the eyes of the moral gatekeepers of the 1920s, this was an unforgivable sin. Explicit descriptions of sex, rampant four-letter words, and the audacity to mix class and passion. The book isn't just about sex, though. It's a social commentary. While Clifford is fixated on industrializing and revitalizing his family's coal mines, Constance and Oliver find freedom in the natural world, often in a wild, untamed forest where they can do whatever the hell they want, away from society's suffocating rules. In 1960, Penguin Books decided it was time to challenge the UK's obscenity laws by publishing a full, uncensored edition of the novel. The trial that followed became legendary. Prosecutors even had the audacity to ask whether this was the kind of book anyone would want their wife or servants to read. The jury, however, wasn't as conservative as expected, and the verdict was not guilty. Within 3 months, 3 million copies of the book flew off the shelves. Just like that, Lady Chatterley's Lover had gone from forbidden fruit to mainstream must-read. Tropic of Cancer. Published in 1934 in France, Tropic of Cancer was the kind of book that made censors clutch their chests and reach for the nearest book-burning torch. The US government took one look at Henry Miller's uncensored descriptions of sex, poverty, and existential chaos and immediately decided, yeah, no one should be reading this. So they banned the book and declared it too obscene for civilized society. In his writing, Miller, who was never one for subtlety, basically said that modern life was a disease, and that true freedom meant dropping the polite act and embracing the mess. The book doesn't have a neat plot. It's more of a wild ride through Miller's brain, as his semi-fictional self stumbles around Paris in a haze of hunger, sex, and philosophical breakdowns. He trashes social norms, worships art, and writes about his encounters, both romantic and otherwise, in ways that are crude, shocking, and somehow weirdly poetic. Naturally, it got banned, but that just made people want it more. For nearly 3 decades, Tropic of Cancer was a black market staple, passed around like contraband among rebellious lit nerds who believed censorship was the real obscenity. But in 1961, Grove Press challenged the ban by publishing the book in the US. Their actions kicked off one of the most famous obscenity trials in American history. The case reached the Supreme Court, and in 1964, the justices ruled that Tropic of Cancer was not obscene. They then gave it the green light and struck a major blow against censorship. Filthy? Yes, but also fearless. And for that, Miller's fever dream of a novel earned its place in the literary canon. Just don't read it out loud at a family dinner. The Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown's 2003 thriller, The Da Vinci Code, kicked off a frenzy of conspiracy theories and pretty much started a cultural war between scholars, religious groups, and a growing crowd of people who suddenly thought that reading the book made them honorary art history experts. The story followed Harvard symbologist Robert Langdon and cryptologist Sophie Neveu as they get caught up in a centuries-old secret battle between the Priory of Sion and the Opus Dei. What's at stake is only the biggest religious bombshell ever. The possibility that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene had a child, thereby creating a hidden royal bloodline. Naturally, the Catholic Church wasn't thrilled about the portrayal of its history, and scholars nearly choked on their coffee over Brown's historical creativity. The book suggests that the Merovingian kings of France were descendants of Jesus, a theory borrowed from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which, fun fact, was based on a widely debunked hoax. But Brown wasn't fazed. He boldly claimed his novel was based on actual historical facts, which is like saying Indiana Jones was a documentary. That, however, didn't stop the Da Vinci Code from selling over 80 million copies and getting a Tom Hanks-led movie adaptation in 2006. Its outrageous theories turned it into an instant bestseller, but also made it a target for bans in multiple countries. Lebanon yanked it off shelves for offending Christians, while several Indian states outlawed both the book and its movie adaptation for being blasphemous. Meanwhile, Vatican officials called for a boycott, and Opus Dei, depicted in the book as a secretive, occasionally violent group, was not thrilled. One scene showed an albino assassin monk named Silas whipping himself. And let's just say it didn't do the group any PR favors. Tier 4. The 120 Days of Sodom. In 1785, while locked up in the Bastille, the Marquis de Sade wrote the 120 Days of Sodom on a 39-foot scroll while rotting in the Bastille. He hid it in his wall like a cursed treasure, probably because even he knew this thing was too deranged to see daylight. The plot is basically a nihilist group project run by 4 French perverts who each represent a failing institution: aristocracy, religion, law, and capitalism. Their one rule: if it feels good, do it. If it doesn't, do it anyway, just louder. To maximize their fun, they barricade themselves inside an isolated chateau in the Black Forest, bringing along 12 accomplices, 10 servants, and 20 victims, mostly teenagers. They don't start with horror. They ease into it like it's a dinner party from hell. Each night, 4 retired sex workers take turns telling stories so cursed, they make Reddit threads look tame. And yes, every story somehow manages to be worse than the last. Inspired by these bedtime tales from hell, the Libertines would act them out, escalating from disturbing fetishes to straight-up torture and murder. They would then go on to, you know what, I would rather not say. By the end of it all, only a select few are left standing, while the rest have suffered unspeakable fates. The book was never finished, which is honestly a blessing. De Sade had meticulously planned the final chapters, but the last parts exist mostly as notes. After the Bastille got stormed in 1789, De Sade claimed he wept tears of blood over the lost manuscript. Okay, calm down, drama queen. In reality, the scroll survived, bounced between collectors like a haunted item on eBay, and finally got published in 1904 under a fake name. Obviously, because no one wants this thing on their resume. Predictably, the book was banned for decades and dismissed as pure pornography in many English and French-speaking countries. Yet somehow, in 1990, it found its way into France's prestigious Pléiade collection, right alongside actual literary classics. These days, some people treat the 120 Days of Sodom like a deep philosophical take on freedom. Others just call it what it is: the fever dream of a man who absolutely should have been left behind bars with no access to paper. The Turner Diaries. If someone owns this book, you're not in a conversation. You're in a radicalization pipeline. This isn't edgy reading material. It's a manifesto for real-world terrorism. Written in 1978 by William Luther Pierce under the pseudonym Andrew MacDonald, it's less a novel and more a step-by-step tutorial for overthrowing democracy and committing genocide, gift-wrapped in neo-Nazi fanfic energy. The plot revolves around the collapse of the US government, the eruption of nuclear war, and the rise of an extremist group called the Organization that establishes a world where non-white people and Jews are exterminated. It's a fun read, if you're a monster. The main character is Earl Turner, a bland white guy who thinks blowing up the government is somehow the pinnacle of intellectual resistance. Basically, the human version of a 4chan thread with a body count. Turner is part of an underground militia fighting a corrupt, Jewish-controlled system. If that already sounds unhinged, walk with me. It gets worse. In the book, the government confiscates all civilian firearms through something called the Cohen Act, and in retaliation, the organization carries out mass bombings, executions, and guerrilla warfare that escalates into a nuclear apocalypse. The violence isn't just physical, it's ideological, with anti-Semitic and racist propaganda being sprouted by the organization throughout the book. One of the most infamous moments is called The Day of the Rope, where Turner and his comrades round up race traitors, journalists, politicians, and anyone not on board with their ideology, and hang them in the streets. But it doesn't stop there. Turner eventually earns a spot in an even more elite secret order within the organization, where some members are required to carry cyanide pills in case of capture. Turner fails to off himself after being arrested and tortured, which means he's tasked with a suicide mission, crashing a nuke-laden plane into the Pentagon. The final act sets off a chain of events that lead to the total destruction of the US government, Israel, and essentially anyone who isn't a white nationalist. It ends with a historian in the year 2099, fondly describing how the world is now a peaceful utopia, because all non-white people and dissenters were wiped out. It's genocidal propaganda masquerading as retrofuturism. And worst of it all, it didn't stay fiction. The Turner Diaries inspired the Oklahoma City bombing, countless hate crimes. It's been called the Bible of the racist right. And despite being banned in several countries, it circulates in extremist circles today. It was classified as hate literature and banned in Canada due to its extreme content and dangerous ideological influence. The Anarchist Cookbook. There are controversial books, and then there's The Anarchist Cookbook. Released in 1971, it's the kind of book you'd expect to find in the back corner of a shady military surplus store. Wedged between gas masks and a stack of how to build your own bomb pamphlets you're probably not supposed to touch. Considering the book's contents, which we will get to in a second, it would surprise you to know that The Anarchist Cookbook was actually written by William Powell, a teenager at the height of the Vietnam War. As the name suggests, it's essentially a DIY guide to chaos. It offers instructions on everything from making explosives and rigging up makeshift telecommunications hacking devices to cooking homemade LSD. Powell, who was pissed off at the government and the Vietnam War, wanted to give America a wake-up call, and he decided that the best way to do that was through a book. Powell's research process was just as wild as the book's content. He combed through resources ranging from the Boy Scout Handbook to anarchist manifestos like The System by Abby Hoffman before piecing together what would become The Anarchist Cookbook. Now, you might think that Powell, after writing something so notorious, would have relished his fame. But instead, he spent the rest of his life regretting it. By the late 70s, Powell had converted to Anglicanism, moved overseas, and dedicated himself to education and conflict resolution. He repeatedly begged his publisher, Lyle Stewart, to take the book out of circulation. But since Powell never owned the rights, it remained in print. By the time Powell passed away in 2016, he had spent decades attempting to distance himself from his creation, which he had started calling a misguided product of his youth. But despite Powell's regret, The Anarchist Cookbook has lived on. Once it hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Bootleg PDFs, digital copies, and updated versions circulated wildly. It has been linked to criminal cases and has kept governments and law enforcement on alert. But legally, it's protected under the First Amendment in the US. This protection has kept the book in circulation, despite its controversial and dangerous nature. Life and Death in Shanghai. Imagine waking up one morning thinking it's just another day, only for a mob of teenage fanatics to storm into your house, flip your furniture, and declare you an enemy of the state before you've even had your morning tea. That was Nian Chang's reality in 1966 Shanghai. A wealthy widow and executive at Shell Oil, Chang found herself on the wrong side of history when Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution plunged China into chaos. Her crime? simply existing in a time when class enemies were being cleansed. The Red Guards, Mao's teenage enforcers, arrested Cheng and dragged her into a 6-year nightmare. Locked into a filthy, tiny cell, she was interrogated, beaten, and starved. The guards accused her of being a spy for imperialists, a traitor to the revolution. If she just admitted it, the suffering could stop. But Cheng refused. Every time they hit her with a new accusation, she fought back with sharp logic and an iron will. When words didn't work, the guards tried breaking her body instead. Torture, isolation, mind games, they threw everything at her. She endured false promises of freedom, only to have them snatched away. But she never cracked. Eventually, after years of relentless torment, the authorities paroled her. Not out of mercy, but because they needed to save face. But her freedom came with a crushing blow. Cheng returned home only to find out that her only daughter, Mei Ping, was dead. The official story? Suicide. The truth? Murder. Mei Ping was killed by fanatics of the same regime that had spent years trying to break Cheng. Determined to expose the truth, Cheng escaped China, first to Canada, then to the US, whereas she wrote Life and Death in Shanghai. The book tore open the ugly wounds of the Cultural Revolution and exposed a regime that was willing to destroy its own people just to maintain political purity. Naturally, China banned it, but some stories are too powerful to be erased. Forever Amber. In 1944, Kathleen Winsor released Forever Amber, a novel so scandalous that it was banned in quite a few US states. So why did everyone have their parties in a twist? Well, the book's heroine, Amber St. Clair, is far from the typical virtuous woman you'd expect from 17th century English society. She uses her beauty as a weapon, seduces men for her own social gain, and, most controversially, refuses to face any consequences for it. Set during Restoration England, the story follows Amber's rise from an orphaned farm girl to a duchess, a feat she achieved by climbing society's rank with a mixture of seduction, cunning, and sheer willpower. Oh, and she doesn't do it with any regrets. Amber's life starts in the English countryside at a time when she's completely unaware of her noble origins. Everything changes when she meets Bruce Carleton, a charming nobleman who has no intention of marrying a woman of her low status. Undeterred, Amber throws herself at him, and when he takes her virginity, she makes sure to latch on, determined to follow him to London. Of course, Bruce abandons her, so Amber has no choice but to do what it takes to survive in a world that demands women play the game or get played. What follows is a whirlwind of marriages, affairs, betrayals, and social maneuvers. Amber climbs the social ladder by seducing wealthy, powerful men and using their resources to secure her place in the world. She marries 4 times, has children by 2 of her lovers, one of whom is King Charles II himself, and weathers everything from debtor's prison to the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London. Through it all, Amber remains unapologetic. She doesn't seek redemption, never regrets her actions, and refuses to follow the moral path readers might expect. Her refusal to conform to the typical female redemption arc was too much for many critics, especially in an era when women were expected to be demure and submissive. Forever Amber became a bestseller, but it didn't take long for critics, religious leaders, and moral watchdogs to condemn it as obscene and pornographic. The Catholic Church denounced the novel, and it was banned in Boston. Despite the controversy, the book's legacy lives on to this day. The Country Girls. The Country Girls was so controversial in 1960s Ireland that it didn't just face bans. It got burned multiple times by priests and in public. It was like a medieval witch hunt, only this time the target was literature. Edna O'Brien's trilogy follows 2 small-town Irish girls, Kate and Baba, navigating love, sex, and disappointment in a world that prepared women to be quiet and unquestioning. Kate, the dreamy romantic, wants a grand love story. Baba, her sharp-tongued, chaos-loving best friend, just wants to have fun. Together, they leave their strict convent school and head to Dublin, where things, predictably, go off the rails. Kate falls for an older, sophisticated man who turns out to be a walking red flag in a nice suit, while Baba is busy dragging Kate into one bad decision after another. By the 3rd book, Girls in Their Married Bliss, the tone has shifted. Kate and Baba are both trapped in unhappy marriages, and the romantic ideals of their youth have been shattered by harsh reality. In that book, O'Brien flips the script. Baba gets a raw first-person voice to open and close it, while Kate's parts drift into a distant third person, like she was already fading from her own life. Naturally, Irish authorities weren't thrilled. The book was banned under the Censorship of Publications Act, which had already blacklisted over 1,600 books. But banning wasn't enough. People had to destroy it. In O'Brien's hometown, there was a public book burning. Religious leaders called the book filth, and politicians insisted that no decent home should have a copy. Ironically, all this outrage only fueled the book's fame, which in turn launched O'Brien to international literary stardom, while Ireland tries to pretend it never happened. Decades later, The Country Girls is recognized as one of the most influential novels of all time. It's not all the way at the top, but it definitely makes the list. Back in the day, it was just another piece of dangerous literature that dared to suggest women might want more from life. And for that, it had to burn. Tier 5. Sold. Written by Patricia McCormick, Sold is one of those books that makes you want to grab a baseball bat and storm into the fictional world to fight on behalf of the main character. It's a novel about a 13-year-old Nepalese girl named Lakshmi, who is sold into slavery in India. Lakshmi starts out as a simple village girl living in a mud hut in the mountains of Nepal with her pet goat named Tali and her loving mother. But when the monsoons wipe out her family's meager crops, her stepfather decides to sell her. He tells her that she'll work as a maid for a rich woman in the city, but of course he's lying through his teeth. Excited at the thought of helping her family, Lakshmi sets off with no idea she's heading straight into hell. Eventually, she arrives at a place ironically called Happiness House, which turns out to be a brothel run by the monstrous Mumtaz. When Lakshmi realizes what's happening, she refuses to cooperate, but Mumtaz has her beaten and starved into submission. She befriends other girls trapped in the brothel, learns bits of English from a young boy named Harish, and holds on to her mother's words. Simply to endure is to triumph. Despite the horrors of her experience, Lakshmi never loses herself completely. When an American man posing as a customer offers her a way out, she hesitates because she's seen what happens to girls who try to run. But when he returns with the authorities, Mumtaz's empire crumbles, and Lakshmi is finally free. Sold has been widely praised for its raw, unflinching portrayal of human trafficking, and of course, banned. In 2024, the Katy Independent School District in Texas removed it from shelves, citing concerns that it might promote gender fluidity, which, just to clear things up, it does not. Lawn Boy. At first glance, this book might seem like a simple, wholesome, coming-of-age story about a kid mowing lawns. But if you look closer, you will see that it's a lot deeper than that. Written by Jonathan Evison and published in 2018, the novel follows Mike Munoz, a broke Mexican-American young adult trying to navigate life. The book is semi-autobiographical, which means Evison sprinkled in some real-life experiences into the plot. Critics loved it. Kirkus praised its humor. The Washington Post called it a battering ram to stereotypes, and Library Journal gave it a starred review. Sounds pretty solid, right? So why is it on this list? Well, the controversy kicked off in 2021, when a parent at a Texas school board meeting claimed Lawn Boy was packed with sexual content and obscenity. 3 people were so outraged that they actually filed police reports. Yeah, it was pretty serious. Soon, the book was facing complaints about explicit language, LGBTQ+ themes, and a particular scene where an adult man recalls a childhood sexual experience with another 4th grader. Evison had to step in and clarify that it wasn't pedophilia, just a character recalling something from his past. As the controversy spread, Lawn Boy started disappearing from school libraries across the U.S. Fairfax County Public Schools even removed it temporarily, only to put it back after a review. Meanwhile, Evison was dealing with death threats, because apparently writing about tough topics is a capital offense in some places. New Portuguese Letters. This book was so scandalous that 3 accomplished women ended up in jail just for writing it. In 1970s Portugal, that was all it took, especially if what you were writing about included female sexuality, power, and the patriarchy. The government didn't just ban it, they basically panicked. New Portuguese Letters was the work of Maria Isabel Barreno, Maria Teresa Horta, and Maria Velo da Costa, collectively known as the 3 Marias. Inspired by a 17th century collection of love letters written by a Portuguese nun to her French lover, the Marias decided to flip the narrative. Their version was a wild, raw mix of letters, poems, essays, and feminist rage that didn't follow any traditional structure or play by anyone's rules. The book openly explored female desire, infidelity, motherhood, betrayal, and the crushing weight of societal expectations. It used lyrical, sometimes explicit language, and was unapologetically political. In a country where censorship ruled everything under the Estado Novo dictatorship, This was a full-on act of literary rebellion. Naturally, the government lost it. New Portuguese letters was banned in 1972, and the three Marias were arrested and put on trial for outrage to public decency. Their crime? Writing honestly about women's inner lives in ways that didn't exist to please or protect men. To the regime, this was just as dangerous as any protest or political pamphlet. But the plan backfired. Instead of disappearing into obscurity, the book exploded onto the international stage. Feminists, writers, and intellectuals from all over the world rallied behind the Marias. Protests erupted. Letters of support poured in. And Portugal suddenly looked like a repressed regime afraid of its own women. The trial dragged on until 1974, when the Carnation Revolution peacefully overthrew the dictatorship. Under the new leadership, they were acquitted. The Marias walked free, and New Portuguese Letters went from banned to iconic. A feminist classic born out of defiance. Leçon contre drôlatique. Honoré de Balzac was many things. A literary genius. A coffee addict. And apparently, a man who thought the best way to cement his legacy was by writing a collection of scandalous tales that made even his fellow 19th century Frenchmen blush. Les 50 drôlatiques, or the 100 Facetious Tales, was his attempt at reviving the vulgar, no-holds-barred storytelling of old France. Inspired by Boccacco's Decameron and the wild humor of Rabelais, Balzac planned to write 100 of these medieval-style stories. He only made it to 30 before society decided it had seen enough. Actually, he stopped because he had some personal issues, but you get the point. The book was reportedly banned for obscenity in Australia at certain points during the 20th century, though official records are pretty scarce. That said, it's safe to assume that most countries weren't exactly rushing to stock their libraries with copies of Balzac's book. The language used in the book was, by itself, half the scandal. Balzac deliberately wrote in an archaic Renaissance-era French, filled with odd spellings, strange grammar, and words he just flat out made up. Imagine Shakespearean English, if Shakespeare had been chugging absinthe and making dirty jokes for 600 plus pages. The stories were pure chaos. Lustful priests, scheming nobles, and hapless villagers getting caught up in absurd, borderline obscene situations. Medieval France, according to Balzac, was one giant drunken carnival, where morality was optional and debauchery was practically a civic duty. Naturally, this didn't sit well with the moral police of his time. Critics called it vulgar, indecent, and get this, a bacchanalia of flush preapi. Yes, that's a real quote. Even George Sand, a fellow writer known for stirring up scandal, called it inappropriate. Alphonse de Lamartine dismissed it as futile and cynical. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Balzac leaned all the way in, packing his stories with lust, greed, power struggles, and a complete refusal to tone anything down. Despite, or maybe because of, its reputation, droll stories gained what some have called a cult following. Imagine watching a serial killer drain human blood into a yogurt container while authorities did nothing to stop him. Or discovering that your grandfather actually abused every child in your family for decades and deciding to confront him on camera. This is the most disturbing Documentaries Iceberg. Tier 1. Fahrenheit 9/11. The year is 2004, and Michael Moore decides to poke the bear, or rather the entire Bush administration. He points his camera straight at them, and suddenly Disney remembers it's allergic to free speech. Here's how it starts. Moore sets out to film what really happened on September 11th. Not the heroic montages or public speeches, but the uncomfortable bits, like President George W. Bush sitting in a Florida classroom reading My Pet Goat, upside down. Then, as his chief of staff whispers, "Sir, the country's under attack," the president keeps reading, for 7 more minutes, to school children, about goats. Meanwhile, New York is literally burning. But Moore doesn't stop with that awkward comment. He follows the paper trail and the flight paths. While regular Americans couldn't even get on a Greyhound bus after 9/11, 142 Saudis, including several members of the bin Laden family, were quietly flown out of the country. It gets darker. The Bush and bin Laden families had long-standing business ties through the Carlyle Group. Then there's Halliburton, Dick Cheney's old company, watching its stock price soar thanks to no-bid contracts in the Iraq War. Moore films Marine recruiters prowling malls in Flint, Michigan, trying to convince working-class kids to enlist for a war built on weapons of mass destruction that never existed. At first, the studio is all in. Miramax funds it for $6 million. Then Disney, the parent company, sees the rough cut and realizes they've just bankrolled a political grenade accusing the president of cashing in on a tragedy. Oh, and it's being released 5 months before the election in Florida, where Jeb Bush, the president's brother, controls Disney's tax breaks. Suddenly, Disney has a moral awakening, or maybe just a financial one. They block the release, claiming they don't do partisan politics. The real reason? Don't bite the hand that signs your subsidies. But censorship rarely works the way corporations hope. Harvey Weinstein leaks the story to the New York Times, turning Disney's quiet cover-up into a front-page scandal. Under pressure, the studio scrambles and secretly lets the Weinsteins buy the film back. Same $6 million price tag, plus a clause that 60% of the profits must go to charity. Because nothing says we support free expression like taking your money back through a loophole. And in the ultimate plot twist, it all backfires. The film wins the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the festival's top honor. Conservatives call for boycotts, which only make the movie more famous. It smashes the box office, $23.9 million on opening weekend, and $222 million total. Nearly 2 decades later, Fahrenheit 9/11 still holds the record as the highest-grossing documentary ever made. Turns out there's one thing more powerful than propaganda: censorship with a receipt. Under the Sun. In 2013, Russian filmmaker Vitaly Mansky agrees to make a documentary in North Korea. The contract is airtight. The Ministry of Culture writes the script, chooses the family, picks the locations, even approves the final cut. He's supposed to show a perfectly ordinary family preparing for national celebrations. Nothing more, nothing less. The family chosen is 8-year-old Zin-Mi and her parents. On screen, it looks exactly the way the state wants it to look. A spotless apartment, a hardworking father, a cheerful mother, and a daughter rehearsing patriotic songs with her classmates. It's the picture of prosperity, or at least that's what the official film would have you believe. But the documentary doesn't stop there. The camera also captures what happens between the takes. You see government handlers marching in and out of the room, telling the parents exactly what to say and how to sit. During dinner rehearsals, handlers feed him lines about factory abundance. He delivers it flat, so they make him redo it until he sounds grateful enough for the camera. The same thing happens in Zin-Mi's classroom. The children clap on cue, chant on cue, and if the rhythm isn't quite right, the scene is halted and corrected. Even the family apartment isn't really theirs. It's a stage, polished for filming, filled with props they don't own. The only reason any of this survived is because Mansky filmed everything twice. One version for the censors, spotless and approved, the other, secretly copied and smuggled out, showed the in-between moments. Handlers shouting, scenes reshot, emotions rehearsed. That's the version the world saw. When the film was released, North Korea reacted the way you'd expect. They filed official complaints, demanded the Russian government block it, and had the featured family denounce it in public. Whether their condemnation was genuine or another forced performance is impossible to know. But North Korea isn't the only country staging its own truth. In Tier 3, we'll meet children who became invisible to their own government, left to die in subway tunnels while officials pretended they didn't exist. The War Game. The BBC thought they were getting an educational film about surviving a nuclear attack. What they got instead was so horrifying they banned it for 20 years. In the middle of the Cold War, the BBC decided to calm the nation by showing them how to survive a nuclear attack. Because nothing says reassurance like simulating the end of civilization. The year is 1965. Britain is building fallout shelters, handing out pamphlets, and pretending that a little preparation can outsmart a megaton bomb. So the BBC commissions filmmaker Peter Watkins to create an educational film. Part public service announcement, part morale booster. The goal? Show that nuclear war might be scary, but manageable. A stiff upper lip and some good planning. That's all you need. This is where Peter Watkins comes in. He actually takes the assignment seriously. Instead of staging a stiff public service announcement, he interviews nuclear physicists, military experts, and emergency planners. He wants accuracy, and that's exactly what he delivers. Unfortunately for the BBC, the accurate version looks nothing like their cheerful pamphlets. The film shows what happens if a single megaton warhead lands on Kent. By 9:16 a.m., detonation. By noon, the southeast of England looks like the Middle Ages returned with radiation burns. Emergency services collapse instantly. Food distribution is gone. Hospitals overflow in hours. By evening, people are looting shops for poisoned rations while police shoot looters in the street. Martial law isn't restoring order. It's just proving that order doesn't exist anymore. Watkins' realism is devastating. You see families herded into mass graves, You see civil defense volunteers abandoning their posts. You see social collapse unravel faster than anyone could have imagined. The government's nuclear planning is exposed as a fantasy, a stack of pamphlets with no bearing on reality. Prime Minister Harold Wilson watched it privately and made the decision himself. Banned. Official excuse? Too frightening for the British public. The real reason, as later documents revealed, was much simpler. It showed the government was helpless. Ironically, the film thrived everywhere but Britain. The war game won the 1967 Academy Award for Best Documentary and screened around the world while the country that made it pretended it didn't exist. The ban lasted 20 years. When it finally aired in Britain, it was timed to Hiroshima's 40th anniversary. Perfect placement, because the message hadn't aged a day. Nuclear weapons don't protect nations. They erase them. The Cove. You ever watch a documentary and think, wait, did they just film a crime scene? Yeah, that's The Cove. It's 2008, Japan. A tiny coastal town called Taiji. Looks peaceful enough until you realize the beach is literally running red every morning. Enter Luis Sihoyas, photographer, filmmaker, and apparently part-time spy. He wants to expose what's going on inside this cove that Japan's government keeps under tighter security than Area 51. No filming permits, no cooperation, no access. Most people would shrug and move on. Louis, he builds a team like he's casting Ocean's 11, Dolphin Edition. We're talking ex-military divers, free-diving champs, marine biologists, and cameramen who can hide a GoPro inside a seashell. Their goal was to film proof that Taiji fishermen were driving pods of dolphins into a cove, trapping them, and then, doing the unthinkable. The catch, literally, was that the Japanese government pretended it wasn't happening, which meant filming proof wasn't just difficult, it was illegal. So the crew goes full secret agent mode. Cameras disguised as rocks, underwater mics hidden below the surf, thermal scopes, night vision rigs. If Mission Impossible had an animal rights spin-off, this would be the pilot. When they finally got the footage out, it confirmed the rumors. What the world saw was an industrial-scale dolphin slaughter. 23,000 killed every year across Japan. The lucky ones were sold off to marine parks for six-figure price tags. The rest were butchered for meat so packed with mercury it basically glowed in the dark. The worst part? Most of Japan didn't even know. Local officials quietly let it slide. Supermarkets stocked the meat, and the public thought dolphin was just another brand of tuna. Everyone got their cut, literally and financially. Then the Cove dropped. The government called it foreign propaganda. Right-wing groups called it anti-Japanese. Malaysia just banned it altogether. And meanwhile, it won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. So yeah, that went well. Earthlings. What happens when you commission a filmmaker to shoot a routine documentary about pet shelters, and he accidentally uncovers an entire industrial system of torture? You get Earthlings. 6 years of hidden camera footage that every major network refused to touch, because acknowledging it might cost too much in quarterly profits. It starts in Los Angeles, 1999. Sean Monson is hired to film standard animal shelter procedures. Think sterilizations, adoptions, day-to-day operations. Nothing groundbreaking. Except, when he looks through the viewfinder, he realizes the shelter isn't the story. It's just the doorway. Behind it is a much bigger machine. The way America uses animals for everything. Not just pets, but food, clothing, entertainment, and science. So Monson keeps filming. Not for weeks, not for months, but for 6 years. He smuggles cameras into slaughterhouses, research labs, fur farms, and circuses, places that were never supposed to be seen from the inside. What he captures is worse than most horror movies, except it's entirely real. The footage shows cows being skinned while still conscious, pigs crammed into crates so tight they never turn around their entire lives, foxes peeled alive because furriers claim dead animals produce lower quality pelts, circus animals beaten with bull hooks and shocked until they perform for paying crowds. And here's the most chilling part. None of it is illegal. Every scene is industry standard, protected by the same agencies that inspect your local restaurant. In fact, they even have manuals for how to hide it. When Monson finished the cut of Earthlings, he tried to distribute it like a normal documentary. Every major studio passed. Networks wouldn't air it. Early streaming services buried it in legal departments. The message was obvious. This footage threatens billions in revenue. Safer to pretend it doesn't exist. After months of rejections and buried contracts, Monson realized the only way around the wall was simple. Make it free. Upload it, share it, let it spread by word of mouth. With Joaquin Phoenix narrating and Moby composing the score, the film started circulating quietly in Hollywood and activist circles. Eventually, it became one of the most downloaded documentaries in history. But the industries it exposed, still running exactly the same way, still counting on consumers to look away. The only difference is that now, millions of people can't say they didn't know where their dinner, their clothes, or their entertainment came from. Tier 2. Children Underground. When communism collapsed in Romania, the West called it a miracle. Democracy, free markets, and foreign investment. The headlines made it sound like the country was finally catching up to Europe. But beneath the surface, the miracle had casualties. The state orphanages collapsed. Families already in poverty couldn't cope, and thousands of children ended up in the only place left to go, the subway tunnels under Bucharest. That's where director Edith Belsberg arrived in 2001, expecting to document homeless kids. Instead, she walked into an entire underground generation the government insisted didn't exist. The children lived in concrete passageways, surviving on begging, theft, and paint thinner. Above them, the tourists strolled through the city center, completely unaware that just below their feet was a parallel world running on fumes and despair. Belsberg followed 5 of them. Christina, 16, shaved her head and dressed as a boy just to avoid assault, a skill she picked up after years of being passed through violent state orphanages. Macarena, 14, drifted in and out of solvent highs until she barely recognized the world around her. Mihai, the youngest at 12, still clung to notebooks and the fantasy that school could save him. And then Anna and Marian, siblings trying to hold on to each other while the rest of the world discarded them. The documentary never tells you what to think. It doesn't need narration because the images do the work. Kids curled up on bare concrete, fighting over scraps, spraying paint thinner into rags and inhaling until they can't feel hunger or cold anymore. Every time a small trace of childhood sneaks out, it gets smothered by the reality of survival. The government's reaction was predictable. Officials denied the crisis, restricted media access, and accused Western filmmakers of exploiting children. Classic playbook. Discredit the messenger while ignoring the message. Meanwhile, the kids kept living and dying in the tunnels. The nightmare doesn't stop when the credits roll, because after filming ended, their stories only got worse. Christina never really left the streets. Addiction took the place of family, and heroin became easier to find than food. By 19, she was pregnant. Her girlfriend, who supported them through sex work, tried to help her stay clean long enough to give birth. It didn't last. The baby was taken almost immediately by an adoption charity. Macarena didn't make it that far. She vanished not long after filming, most likely overdose or violence. In Romania, missing street kids aren't investigated. They're replaced. Mihai managed a brief escape. He was taken in by a Belgian program for displaced youth, and for a short time it worked. But systems have limits. He eventually returned to Bucharest, back to the same tunnels he once promised to never see again. Only Marian got out for good. He was placed in a shelter because he was still young enough to be considered rehabilitable. Everyone else was written off as unsalvageable. International festivals celebrated Children Underground. Romania banned it. Abroad, critics called it a masterpiece of raw honesty. At home, it was treated like it never existed. So yeah, out of sight, out of mind. Exactly the policy that put them there. Mommy Dead and Dearest. That is dead. On June 14, 2015, a Facebook post appears on Dee Dee Blanchard's page while her body cools in a pink Missouri bedroom. Not exactly the status update her prayer group expected from a devoted caregiver. When police arrive at the Pink Habitat for Humanity house, they find Dee Dee's corpse, but not her disabled daughter. Gypsy Rose is missing. The cops assume she's been kidnapped by whoever killed her mother. They issue an Amber Alert for a terminally ill girl who couldn't walk, eat, or survive without medication. Hours later, the IP trace leads to Wisconsin, where police expect to rescue a sick child and instead find her walking perfectly fine. To understand how we got here, we need to go back 20 years. Gypsy was 8 when Dee Dee discovered that sick children attract money like magnets attract metal. What psychiatrists call Munchausen syndrome by proxy, Dee Dee called opportunity. She started small, claimed Gypsy had sleep apnea, then epilepsy. Soon the diagnoses multiplied. Muscular dystrophy, leukemia, vision problems, hearing problems, developmental delays. By age 10, Gypsy was supposedly dying of multiple conditions simultaneously while miraculously surviving through mother's devoted care. Making this fiction believable required commitment, Dee Dee shaved Gypsy's head to simulate chemotherapy patients. She fed her daughter medications that rotted her teeth, then blamed the decay on cancer treatments. She confined Gypsy to wheelchairs until the girl's muscles weakened from disuse. When Gypsy tried to walk, Dee Dee would chain her to the bed. When she told anyone her real age, Dee Dee beat her with coat hangers until she recanted. Doctors never questioned a thing. One surgeon removed her salivary glands. Another gave her feeding tubes she didn't need. Neurologists prescribed seizure medications for epilepsy that existed only on paper. Meanwhile, the money poured in. Make-A-Wish sent them to Disney World twice. Habitat for Humanity built them that pink house. Churches held fundraisers. Celebrities visited for photo opportunities. The entire Springfield community rallied around this tragedy, never suspecting they were funding a hostage situation. Behind those pink walls, Gypsy lived in medical captivity. She knew she could walk. She knew the meds made her sick. She just also knew what happened every time she tried to stop pretending. Chains, beatings, threats. In 2012, during one of Dee Dee's pharmacy runs, Gypsy created a secret Facebook profile and joined a Christian dating site where she met Nicholas Godejohn. He was 26, autistic with multiple personality disorder. They messaged each other every night for 3 years while Dee Dee slept. By 2015, they'd constructed a shared fantasy where he was her protector and she was his princess. They discussed marriage, children, freedom. Fantasies turned into plans because every conversation ended with the same conclusion. Dee Dee had to disappear. But Dee Dee controlled everything. Money, documents, medical records. Running away meant starting from nothing. And Gypsy's muscles were so weak from decades of forced wheelchair use that standing for long periods exhausted her. Murder started seeming like the only exit. June 2015. Gypsy stole money from Dee Dee's hidden cash stash and mailed it to Nicholas for a knife, gloves, and bus fare. He arrived in Springfield on June 12th. He arrived, they met, and 2 nights later, she handed him gloves and hid in the bathroom while he did what she couldn't. Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee 17 times while she slept. They fled to Wisconsin immediately, posting that Facebook status from the bus. Not a confession or cry for help. Just an announcement that the show was over. The trial struggled to categorize this case. Gypsy was simultaneously victim and perpetrator, abuse survivor and murder conspirator. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and received 10 years. Nicholas, who wielded the knife, got life without parole. Titicut Follies. The year is 1967. Bridgewater State Hospital wants good PR. They give Frederick Wiseman unlimited access for a month. Film our humane treatment. Show the taxpayers we're helping the mentally ill. Administrators literally walk him through the facility, proud of what they're showing. Wiseman films what they show him, and it's not pretty or humane. Guards strip search patients for fun, making them bend over and spread while they laugh. Force feeding becomes entertainment, shoving tubes down throats while mocking the gagging. Men left naked in cells so long their muscles atrophy. One patient stands motionless for days, while staff walk past like he's furniture. The administrators watch Wiseman film all of this. They think it looks normal. That's the terrifying part. Wiseman leaves with 80 hours of footage. Massachusetts suddenly realizes they just funded evidences of their own crimes. Every frame is a lawsuit. Every scene is bankrupt the state material. Before the film premieres, state lawyers get creative. They claim showing the abuse violates patient privacy more than committing the abuse. A judge agrees, and the film gets banned for embarrassing the government. The footage sits in a vault for 24 years. Those same patients were still in those same cells, still being abused, while the proof rots in storage. Massachusetts literally locked up the evidence and kept committing the crime. In 1991, courts finally allow release, but only for educational purposes, with disclaimers, with restrictions. You can watch the state torture people, but only in controlled settings where officials could explain why it wasn't that bad. The men Wiseman filmed, most died in those cells. Bridgewater still operates. The only difference now is no cameras allowed without script approval. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. November 2001. Dr. Andrew Bagby gets 5 bullets in a Pennsylvania park. His ex-girlfriend, Shirley Turner, the one with the restraining orders, the stalking history, violent outbursts, everyone somehow forgot to write down, flees to Canada before police can arrest her. Then she drops the bomb. She's pregnant with Andrew's baby. Kurt Quinn, Andrew's best friend since childhood, picks up a camera. The plan is simple. Make a film for the baby. Call him Zachary so he'll know who his father was. He interviewed everyone who loved Andrew, Old home videos, photo albums, a love letter from beyond the grave. Except the project immediately becomes something else. Evidence of a system actively choosing to kill a child. Turner gets charged with Andrew's murder, but Canada lets her out on bail. The judge says she's not a danger to society, so she gets custody of Zachary, the child she had with the man she's accused of killing. Andrew's parents, David and Kate Bagby, now have to smile at their son's murderer during supervised visits, hand their grandson back to the woman who shot their son 5 times. The camera keeps rolling as the nightmare escalates. Turner threatens suicide multiple times, with social workers documenting it, but judges just shrug. She has violent outbursts. She's caught lying about everything, but nothing is enough for the system to spring into action. The Bagbys beg the court, telling them that Turner was going to kill their grandson. The system's response? She has parental rights. August 18, 2003. Turner straps 13-month-old Zachary to her chest, drives to the Atlantic Ocean, and jumps in. Murder-suicide. Exactly what everyone predicted. Exactly what the Bagbys spent 2 years trying to prevent. The system that was supposed to protect Zachary handed him to his killer and wished her luck. The film just hammers you with preventable tragedy until you want to reach through the screen and strangle everyone who lets this happen. Tier 3. The act of seeing with one's own eyes. Imagine pointing a camera at real autopsies for 32 minutes with no music, no narration, no explanation. Just corpses being taken apart piece by piece. That's the act of seeing with one's own eyes, 1971. And it's exactly as watchable as you'd expect. Stan Brakhage walks into a Pittsburgh morgue with a camera. Films actual pathologists doing actual autopsies on actual dead people. No actors, no effects. Just government employees processing human meat like it's their Tuesday shift. Which it is. The cameras watches them crack rib cages with the enthusiasm of someone opening mail. Pulls out organs and weigh them on scales. Slice brain tissue like they're prepping tomorrow's lunch. Every cut is real. Every organ was pumping blood last week. Now it's evidence for a death certificate. No narrator, no score, no emotional handholding. Just 32 minutes of watching bodies that were someone's parent, spouse, kid getting disassembled by people who'll grab coffee after. The title's from Homer. See with your own eyes. Brakhage takes that literally. Forces you to see death without Hollywood makeup or funeral home dignity. Just the industrial processing of human remains by workers who've learned to see corpses as paperwork generators. Critics called it art. Audiences called it trauma. Both right. You either confront mortality or turn it off. Most turn it off. 50 years later, still the most honest film about death ever made. Because Brakhage showed what we're never supposed to see. The dying strips away everything that makes us human, leaving only flesh and tissue samples. Night and Fog. Sometimes a movie doesn't need superheroes or big explosions to change the world. It just needs to show the truth, no matter how painful it is. In 1956, a filmmaker named Alain Resnais made a short movie called Night and Fog. It was only 32 minutes long, on the Holocaust. The documentary doesn't tell stories or use actors. Instead, it shows the real places where these horrible things happened. The camps were still standing then, only 10 years after the war ended. The film shows the buildings, the fences, and the empty fields where people once lived and died. The words in the documentary were written by Gene Carroll, who had survived one of the camps himself. But he doesn't speak with anger or tears. He speaks calmly, almost like reading a report. That calm voice makes the documentary even scarier. Humans can do terrible things and still act like everything is normal. The film doesn't tell stories or name victims. It doesn't have to. It shows the process, how genocide isn't chaos. It's logistics. How ordinary people, when told they're doing their jobs, can run death factories with bureaucratic precision. Near the end, the documentary shows what the soldiers found when they entered the camps. Piles of bodies, glasses, and hair from the people who were killed. The pictures are shocking and hard to forget. What makes Night and Fog powerful is that it doesn't try to make anyone feel better. There are no happy endings, no brave heroes, only truth. The documentary warns everyone that this can happen again if people look away or stay silent. When it came out, many people were upset. It made them realize that regular people, not monsters, helped make these crimes happen. Some followed orders, and some just did nothing. Night and Fog forces viewers to ask themselves, what would I have done? Even today, the film is one of the strongest messages about war and hate. It shows that when people forget the past, they risk letting the same darkness return. Africa Adio. A helicopter flies over Zanzibar. Below, bodies line the shore. The narrator calls it Africa's rebirth. he's lying. This was Africa Adio, a film that tried to capture the end of colonialism and ended up proving why it existed in the first place. Back in 1966, European colonial rule was ending across Africa, and Italian Mondo filmmakers saw opportunity, not to document political transition or cultural independence, but to capture the maximum amount of violence and chaos for Western audiences who wanted to see Africans as savage and unfit for self-governance. 3 years of filming across the continent, Zanzibar, where Arab civilians were executed en masse, the Congo, where rebels murdered, burned, and even cannibalized their victims, Rwanda, 18,000 Watusi killed in 2 months, bodies floating down river while the filmmakers zoom in for better framing, baby elephants killed with grenades for drama, prisoners shot on camera because someone thought realism sells. The filmmakers shoot from helicopters and up close, with the narrator describing events in emotionless clinical tones. No historical context, no explanation of colonial legacies, no analysis of why violence erupts when artificial borders collapse, just bloodshed, presented as evidence of African barbarism. But here's where it gets darker. Much of the footage represents the only visual record of these historical events: the Zanzibar revolution killings, specific Congo battles. This exploitation film accidentally became primary source material for historians studying African decolonization. The American version removes most background information, leading Jacopetti to call it a betrayal of his vision. Translation: even more racist editing that strips away any remaining context. Pure violence porn, marketed as documentary education. Authorities arrest Jacopetti because they believed he filmed a real execution specifically for the documentary. The investigation finds him not guilty, but the question remains: how much of Africa Audio was staged versus documented? The filmmakers deny staging scenes while providing no evidence of their authenticity. Critics like Roger Ebert called it racist and offensive. Some film experts said the directors even faked parts of it, but African governments couldn't stop the film from spreading. It showed real wars and violence, and Western countries used that to claim Africa wasn't ready to stand on its own. The film makes money but ruins Africa's image around the world. It makes freedom look like chaos, independence seem like a mistake, and convinces Western viewers that Africans can't rule themselves. Mondo Cane. 3 Italian filmmakers walk into remote villages with cameras and cash, paid locals to perform the most extreme versions of their customs, then sold the footage as educational documentary. Welcome to Mondo Cane, the film that taught Hollywood how to turn human suffering into box office gold. The pitch sounded educational: show Western audiences cultural practices from remote places, expand worldviews, promote understanding. What Paolo Cavara, Gualtiero Jacopetti, and Franco Prosperi actually delivered was a freak show disguised as anthropology. The formula was simple: find extreme practices, strip away explanation, edit for maximum shock. They'd show pig slaughter in New Guinea, then cut directly to French foie gras production, force-feeding rituals followed by American pet cemeteries. No context, no understanding. Just disgust packaged as education. When rituals looked too ordinary, the directors rewrote them. They handed out props, staged sacrifices, and told locals to act more primitive. Cultural tourism became emotional manipulation, a safari for Western disgust. The beautiful orchestral score made everything worse. Riz Ortolani's melancholic music played over disturbing footage, creating an unsettling contrast that became the signature of exploitation documentaries. Pretty music over ugly images. The template every shock doc would copy. Mondo Cane spawned an entire genre. Mondo films prioritized sensation over truth, shock over education. The success proved audiences would pay to watch human suffering if you called it educational. That insight shaped reality TV, viral videos, and social media algorithms that reward extreme content. The box office called it profit. And if you film horror and call it education, people will pay to feel superior while watching someone else suffer. Tier 4. Faces of Death. A man is electrocuted on camera. Then a woman is eaten by alligators. Some scenes are real, some aren't. Nobody could tell which was which. In 1978, John Allen Schwartz gave you permission by calling it education. Faces of Death mixed real deaths with fake ones so well that viewers couldn't tell the difference. The result? A franchise that turned mortality into entertainment. The concept sounded academic: show real death to help people understand mortality. Autopsy footage, accident scenes, execution, everything society hides. Confront death directly. Learn from it. The reality was pure exploitation. Real corpses mixed with actors playing dead. Actual accidents alongside special effects. No distinction between authentic and fake. Just shock value pretending to be education. Schwartz created Dr. Francis B. Gross, a fictional host who guided viewers through death montages with fake medical commentary. The made-up doctor gave people moral cover. They weren't watching snuff films, they were studying mortality with a medical professional who didn't exist. The formula worked because audiences got thrills plus justification. They could watch people die while claiming educational interest. The fake framing let viewers consume extreme content while pretending it was academic. Multiple sequels followed the same template. Mix real death with staged scenes. Add fictional commentary. Call it documentary education. The franchise made millions while inspiring imitators to push boundaries further. Faces of Death normalized death as entertainment. It paved the way for shock sites, viral death videos, and algorithms that reward extreme content. Critics called it exploitative garbage. Box office receipts proved audience demand. The films became underground classics, passed between viewers testing their tolerance while claiming educational motives. The Pig Farm. What happens when you combine a remote pig farm, a serial killer with access to industrial meat processing equipment, and police who don't investigate missing women because society has already written them off? Vancouver found out in the late 1980s, and the answer involved feeding human remains to pigs while authorities spent 15 years looking the other way. The 2011 documentary The Pig Farm follows the investigation that should have happened in the 1990s when women started vanishing. The victims followed a pattern: indigenous women, sex workers, addicts. The kind society ignores until they're gone. Robert Picton seemed harmless, a quiet farmer who threw parties with his brother. Weird, but not dangerous. That camouflage let him operate for over a decade while police treated missing women like paperwork instead of homicides. The documentary includes survivor interviews, women who escaped Picton's farm after realizing the party was a trap. One describes being handcuffed, then breaking free before Picton could finish his plan. Her testimony is the only first-hand account of what happened to those who didn't escape. His disposal method was efficient. Picton used his farming knowledge to eliminate evidence. Human remains ground up and fed to pigs. Pigs eat everything: bones, teeth, DNA. What they didn't eat got mixed into regular operations, disappearing into British Columbia's food chain. Police accidentally found him. They were searching for illegal weapons when they found belongings from missing women. Then, human remains. The search became Canada's largest crime scene investigation. Excavators sifting through acres looking for evidence that might still exist. The trial revealed complete law enforcement failure. Picton was convicted of second-degree murder for 6 victims. Life sentence, possibility of parole in 25 years. Families of 43 other victims got no justice. The evidence literally didn't exist anymore. The Act of Killing. What if murderers from history made their own movie, starring themselves, about how they killed people? In Indonesia, they did, and they thought it was fun. That's what filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer discovered in Indonesia, where men who once killed thousands now brag about their crimes like movie stars showing off their best scenes. Joshua Oppenheimer went to Indonesia in 2003 to make a film about how the 1965 to 1966 genocide affected the people who survived it. But when he arrived, he found something shocking. The people who did the killing were not hiding or sorry. They were still in power, smiling, and happy to show how they did it. These men had led death squads that killed people accused of being communists. Instead of feeling guilt, they treated their crimes like achievements. When Oppenheimer asked about the genocide, they offered to act it out for the camera. What started as a documentary turned into a strange movie where real killers reenacted their murders with excitement, as if they were making a Hollywood film. They discussed how to make the scenes look realistic. They talked about camera angles, costumes, and lighting, just like professional filmmakers. While pretending to make a movie, they were actually bragging about how they tortured and killed people. They were showing off. One of the main men, Anwar Congo, became the face of the film. He proudly explained how he had learned to kill by watching American gangster movies. Inspired by what he saw, he invented his own killing technique using wire to strangle victims faster and with less blood. He even said he taught this method to others, like it was a skill to be proud of. The casual discussion of murder techniques is disturbing. The men spoke about their actions in chilling detail. They explained how to cause the most fear, how to hide bodies, and how to make sure entire towns stayed terrified. To them, genocide was just a job, something they did well and were rewarded for. Oppenheimer let them tell their own stories on camera without stopping them or arguing. This choice exposed something powerful. By letting the killers direct their own movie, he showed how evil can look ordinary when people believe they're doing something right. They smiled, laughed, and bragged, making the horror of their crimes even more real. The film also includes voices of victims and families who survived, but it focuses mainly on the killers. That's because these men still control the country and decide which version of history is allowed to exist. Many survivors stay silent out of fear. If they speak honestly, they could be punished or worse. When the film was finished, showing it in Indonesia was nearly impossible. The government, still filled with people connected to the killers, didn't want the truth to spread. But underground screenings began anyway. People watched it secretly, seeing, for the first time, a side of history their leaders tried to hide. No fire zone. You're told to run to the safe zone. You go. You find tents, hospitals, families, and then the bombs start falling there instead. That's what happened in Sri Lanka near the end of its long civil war. The government told people to go to safe zones where they wouldn't be hurt. But then, the army bombed those same places. Thousands of innocent people died. The movie No Fire Zone by Callum McRae shows what really happened. It doesn't use fancy cameras or news crews. Everything you see was filmed by people who were actually there, on their phones and small cameras. Some were victims. Some were soldiers. The videos are hard to watch. You see families hiding in tents, children crying beside their parents, and doctors trying to help even while bombs fall on hospitals. The army said they were fighting rebels called the Tamil Tigers, but the film shows they were also attacking normal people on purpose. Soldiers even recorded themselves hurting and killing people. These videos became proof that war crimes happen. Journalists couldn't go into the war zone, so the people trapped inside became the only witnesses. When the movie came out, the world was shocked. The United Nations used it to start an investigation, but the Sri Lankan government said the movie was fake and tried to ban it. Some countries also blocked it to avoid trouble. The film proves that the attacks weren't mistakes. The army knew what it was doing. They destroyed hospitals, schools, and refugee camps, all full of people who thought they were safe. Because the movie was banned in many places, McRae put it online for free. He wanted everyone to see what really happened, so no one could ever say they didn't know. Tier 5. The Dancing Boys of Afghanistan. You think child exploitation ends when the cameras show up. In Afghanistan, it starts when they leave. They call it bachabazi, or boy play. Rich men buy young boys, dress them as girls, make them dance at parties, then do worse. Everyone knows. Nobody stops it. In 2010, filmmaker Najibullah Qureshi went undercover to show what everyone knows actually means. His documentary, The Dancing Boys of Afghanistan, reveals a system so normalized it operates like a talent agency for predators. Boys as young as 10 are sold by starving families who think they're sending them to work. They end up owned, trained to dance in silk, forced to perform for commanders and politicians who treat children like collectibles. Qureshi films the parties in secret. The footage looks like a wedding until you notice the dancers are children. The guests throw money, bid for private time, and brag about their favorites. Behind the camera, Qureshi's translator whispers, "These are government men." Police officers attend. Judges attend. Even army officers keep boys as companions. It's not hidden, it's hierarchy. The higher your rank, the younger your boy. The real horror is the indifference. DVDs of these performances are sold in open markets like pop albums. Families talk about selling sons the same way they discuss buying livestock. Western soldiers stationed nearby admitted they knew, but intervening would complicate alliances, so they didn't. Most of the boys never escape. The few who do often become what was done to them, continuing the cycle because no one ever showed them another life. And the men? They keep their jobs, their uniforms, their parties. Because in a country built with foreign money and local silence, power has always been allowed to dance on someone else's grave. Willowbrook, the last great disgrace. America once built a place to care for disabled children. Then it filled with 6,000 kids, locked the doors, and forgot them. This was Willowbrook State School, Staten Island's best-kept secret until a journalist snuck in with a camera and showed the world what neglect looks like when it gets government funding. Opened in the 1940s, Willowbrook was supposed to be progressive, a place for children with intellectual disabilities to receive education and therapy. By the 1970s, it looked more like a warehouse for unwanted kids, overcrowded, understaffed, and coated in filth. In 1972, young reporter Geraldo Rivera walked in with a hidden camera and found hundreds of children naked, smeared in feces, rocking in their own waste. No treatment, no supervision, just survival. The footage aired on national TV, and viewers realized these weren't forgotten rooms in a hospital. They were the hospital. The deeper Rivera dug, the worse it got. Willowbrook wasn't just neglect, it was policy. The institution had been running medical experiments on the residents. Researchers infected children with hepatitis to study immunity, without consent from families who thought their kids were getting care. In other words, America's own human testing program, hidden inside a school for disabled kids. Public outrage exploded. Lawsuits followed. Politicians made promises. The state swore reform was coming, but it took 15 years to shut Willowbrook down completely. By then, many of the children were adults who'd spent their entire lives institutionalized, products of a system that saw them as defective inventory instead of human beings. When the gates finally closed in 1987, the buildings were demolished, but the legacy stuck, because Willowbrook didn't fail. It functioned exactly as designed, to make society's inconvenient children disappear quietly, while pretending to help them. Just Melvin, just evil. Imagine realizing your family's worst secret, then pointing a camera at it. That's what James Ronald Whitney did in Just Melvin, Just Evil 2000. A documentary that starts like a family reunion and unravels into a generational crime scene. Whitney's grandfather, Melvin Just, molested nearly every child he had access to. Daughters, stepdaughters, nieces, granddaughters. The abuse spanned decades. Whole branches of the family tree built from trauma. The filmmaker doesn't narrate like an outsider. He's one of the victims. You can hear it in his voice. Calm, exhausted, clinical. Like someone cataloging evidence from a life he can't escape. One by one, his relatives sit in front of the camera and tell what happened. Their stories overlap. The same rooms, the same tricks, the same silence afterward. Some turned to drugs, others to alcohol or sex work. Every adult in that family learned how to survive pain in their own self-destructive way. Then comes the confrontation. Whitney sits across from Melvin himself, the man convicted of 12 counts of sexual abuse who still insists he's innocent. He smiles, denies, deflects. And the most horrifying part is that some of the family members still believe him. They hug him, defend him, because denial is easier than remembering. The documentary doesn't end with justice. It ends with damage assessment. Whitney's camera becomes therapy and autopsy at once. Proof that sometimes evil doesn't live in haunted houses or prisons. It lives at a dinner table, smiling for the family photo. Richard Trenton Chase, the vampire of Sacramento. A man unloading groceries in his driveway drops dead from a drive-by shooting. No motive, no connection. Just random death. It was the start of something the press would later call the vampire of Sacramento. Richard Trenton Chase wasn't a serial killer for thrill or profit. He killed because he thought he was dying, that his blood was turning to powder. His treatment plan was simple: drink more blood. Within a month, he murdered 6 people. Pregnant Teresa Wallen was shot, then mutilated. He removed organs, drank her blood, and stuffed parts into containers for later use. 5 days later, he invaded another home and slaughtered 4 more victims: Evelyn Marath, her 6-year-old son, her nephew, and neighbor Dan Meredith. Police found blood drained into cups, organs blended with soda, and body parts stored in jars. Even hardened detectives threw up. And Chase really believed this was medicine. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, the kind that erases the line between logic and nightmare. He'd been institutionalized before, released after improvement, then left untreated until he started hunting people. In 1979, a jury sentenced him to death. 2 years later, he beat them to it, stockpiling antidepressants in his cell until he overdosed. The system he slipped through had finally caged him, but too late for 6 victims and their families. Born to Kill documented his story decades later, clinical and detached, but no camera can really explain it, because Richard Chase was what happens when mental illness meets total neglect, and the result starts drinking to stay alive.